We're back for another episode of Summoning Insight. This is a nostalgia episode filled with your favorite memories of 2012 through 2014 League of Legends, back in the days of Moscow 5 and then Gambit Gaming. But you might say, why not invite someone who actually was on Gambit during that period? Well, we're going to invite their greatest rival instead. I think it's an interesting concept because it gives we can always do more Gambit Moscow 5 stuff later with the Gambit and Moscow 5 guys. But I do think it's interesting to talk to Froggen about the rivalry that he had being part of CLGEU and the outside perceptions of the team, especially since there's some fun instances that we can get into. But before we do that, we do have to touch on some minor.
By the way, I even will throw in there, if people wonder, like, well, why not have a Moscow 5? Don't worry, by the way, if you go back on my shows and look when they're the guests on Summoning Insight or Crackdown or whatever, I've basically gotten all the juice out of that one, guys, because I knew a lot of the stories back in the day, and I've basically gotten, like, Alex H, Edward, a bunch of people that sort of give all the stories. So really, like, a lot of the stuff you want actually is on the YouTube. If you just search now, you probably find it, you know?
Yeah, and especially, like, Alex H is a full-time Riot employee right now, so I don't know what his availability would be, and then I don't even know where Diamond Prox is. Edward, I think, might be doable in the future. But for now, we're going to talk to Froggen in a bit. However, first, there was some potential breaking news here. A rumor that Bwipo and Selfmade have declined to extend their contracts with Fnatic. So both of them, come November of this year, will be free agents. Now, whether they declined that or not, whether they were even offered those contracts, we don't know. But it looks like this is more or less the beginning of the end of Fnatic's ability to challenge for championships, because there's really just no reason to join Fnatic anymore. If they're going to be a huge list of question marks, you look at the ascension of teams like Mad Lions and Rogue and even Schalke. There are just a lot of good options that I think Bwipo and Selfmade, especially NA options as well, one would think, as to what exactly they're going to be doing in the future. So read the tea leaves, Thorin. What do you think this means for Fnatic?
Right. The key thing, obviously, here is we are not confirming or denying these rumors. So what we'll do is effectively treat it as a hypothetical and just have fun with it. And if it happens or doesn't happen, whatever. Right. First thing I would say is both of those players, it makes absolute sense that they wouldn't sign again. First of all, I wouldn't be surprised in terms of Selfmade if he is setting up for the obvious transition to, it might not be G2 yet, because he'll have a very good summer split probably to earn his way back to where he was in the off season. But obviously he knows that's potential, that he could, if he has the right team around him, he can be potentially an MVP player in the league. So to me, that in itself that's probably for me like the last nail in the coffin for Fnatic as an elite org, because if you lose Selfmade, that is far and away the best player on your team in terms of like potential. I know people can say Hylissang, but I don't necessarily know. Like I always feel like he's a bit like the Shy. It's like you should never just look at the top end of the curve. You got to take the full curve. So he definitely has his issues as well. So what I would say is this. People probably saw in the off-season, Carlos, because he's figured out how to actually play this game and not get caught poaching, was able to essentially intimate, what if I was to sign a Selfmade one day to upgrade from Jankos? That's essentially just saying, I will sign Selfmade if I can. He's basically just telling you what he wants to do, but he's cleverly couched it, right? And similarly, if people remember, around the time that Fnatic did that weird live stream with Sam Matthews and someone from their org, who I forget what this title is, they were basically talking about this topic. When they were talking about how they wanted to have perks, etc., they were talking about how they were going to like get on with like Selfmade's contract and make sure he was locked in. That was only in this off-season, guys. We've only done one split. So what that means is they failed to sign who at the time was the number one person they had to keep. And as Monty says here, think about it. What reason now would you have to join Fnatic? Because here were the old reasons. They were one of the best orgs in the entire world. This is the beginning of LCS, actually, in the Gambit era. They were a team that had the best players. That's always a classic reason to join a team. In fact, if you watch my interview with Alfari, essentially, he joined Origin to play with people like Nuclear. It wasn't because Origin was the best org. That's always a good reason to join. The third one, though, and you all know it's what Monty alluded to, it's get paid, right? Fnatic right now is going to give you none of the three. And because of franchising in both regions, ridiculously so. Like, we're at a point now where I'm not exaggerating. I think almost any LCS team could pay more than Fnatic if they want. Like, if they choose, like, I mean, I'm sure people heard of this, that in the off-season, there was actually a rumor that, like, maybe CLG would make, like, a super team, believe it or not. Not the lineup they made now, obviously, but, like, maybe they'd get some, like, massive name people and maybe a big coach that would be involved. Well, if a team like CLG can shell out that much, then they could have all these players. And on the Bwipo side, that one's a bit harder to read, because I will say, if people saw the weird comments he made in the offseason on the now never to be seen show that was deleted from history and put in the fucking memory hole in room 101 because of Whipple's fucking betrayal, let's just say. In that episode, he obviously, like, famously, one of the things that shocked a lot of people is he actually criticised a bunch of the teammates. That he criticised Self-Made Direct. He sort of intimated something about Reckless, I think. And basically, if people don't know, since there had been internal issues in Fnatic a long time, he was one of the players who I don't think was happy with some of his teammates. I suspect they weren't happy with him. So if you look at the fact that, like, let's be real, he now is the main scapegoat of the team. Like, they sort of live and die off him anyway, but whenever he has what happens in Blippo's career is the short version, right? He looks good in the split. He has amazing games in the split. He maybe even looks good against an underdog in the playoffs. Then in whatever the last playoff series is, whether it's against G2 or someone else, he nearly always in the last playoff series, unfortunately, has a bunch of int games, and then even the Fnatic fans are like, fuck this guy. So it's like, you know what? I wouldn't feel loyalty to Fnatic if I was Blip at that point in time. Maybe I go somewhere and reinvent my career, you know. So I think for everyone it makes sense except Fnatic, basically. It's actually, the Fnatic angle is probably the biggest one, because as you say, to me, I already think this year was the distinction for me. I looked at their team at the beginning of this year and I was like, dude, they shouldn't even be number 2. Like, Rogue should actually be better than them on paper. And then who knows, God forbid any of those rookie teams ever, like, blow out like Mad Lions did, as Mad Lions in fact did. So to me, I look at Fnatic now, and in games like Counter-Strike, maybe they still have some specialties where they can stay on top, or smaller games where they can afford it. But I think in League of Legends, I'm sorry, the reason I gave the CLG example is, get ready, they're going to become CLG. CLG used to be one of the absolute best. They had all the same factors, right, Monty? But you know now, it doesn't really mean anything to play for CLG. It just means you're in the LCS, right? So I could see a world where, look, they have the fan base to survive, but I wouldn't be surprised if in a year or two, Fnatic's like the 5th best org in the LEC, you know, and they're barely a playoff team, or they're just a playoff team with some old players or something.
Yeah, it does seem that I when we looked at, if you're going to compare them to CLG, I think that it is apt in that they have kind of an aura of the legacy about them, right? And so did CLG, obviously reaching back all the way to like 2011, 2012. But if you don't do a good job of kind of perpetuating your brand and perpetuating that prestige, and then also making sure that you're at least somewhat competitive, or that you're perceived as an attractive option for players, which CLG just kind of totally lost. Yes. I mean, I would argue that even when they were winning in like 2014, they were still pretty questionable in terms of their star power, even their fan base. And they never really did anything after they were bought out by Madison Square Garden to do good marketing, or to be what they were in terms of a brand in the past, because the brand was really Hotshot, right? It was really based around Hotshot.
And then Double Lift, probably those two main names, right?
Yeah, and then Double Lift, and also kind of being the, I would say, mature fans' alternative to the hordes of TSM. Like there was a really different vibe with the team.
They were the thinking man's team, right? That really was the angle at the time. Yeah, I mean, the joke, if people don't know, in the old days of CLG, is even if they lost, because they might try some unique strategy, you could sort of get something out of it, even though they lost the game. So it was actually an angle to, you didn't even have to beat TSM to have fans.
Yeah, and they did have that reputation because of players like Chowster, who is known for his shot calling, or from Link, who was known for kind of innovating some cool builds and like playing a very different.
And his written works.
And his written works. he was a great author as well,
exactly.
As we know.
Polymath.
So someday we'll have to do a dramatic reading of the Tunto Manifesto. But that all being said, I think they did cultivate, like you said, a more cerebral atmosphere. And also I think it was just fun too, with the way that Matt Com, the old manager, who's a great artist, would like draw all those victory, pictures. But I think Fnatic, they really feel lost in terms of their brand right now and where they're going with the team, because they were so reliant on just, like, winning is not a brand. That's the problem that a lot of teams face.
Because eventually you stop winning, don't you? So what do you do after that? Yeah.
You can't win forever. So
applies for everyone, yeah.
I mean, TSM is figuring that out really fast right now. And I think TSM is also kind of on a course, away from, not too dissimilar. So I don't know. I think like Fnatic, if they're not going to be an attractive option for players, they really need to figure out what makes them unique as a team, or take a very different approach to how they're going to be constructing this roster, whether it's kind of rookie players, whether it's a more specialist or one-dimensional but fun approach is often a good tactic that one can take. But
basically, Fnatic need to become the new Unicorns of Love Chaos style.
Yes,
there's
exactly.
a reference for you. There's a reference and a half.
Well, and it's funny. It didn't Kickus like tweet recently that he was gonna try and come back
play again. Yeah,
for sure. So there you go. Just bring him back.
By the way, there's one last angle I want to hit on this, just because look, I've been setting this up for like a decade now, not really, but like the better part of a decade. Because effectively, what you really want to know if you're a Fnatic fan is, well, who is to blame? Because it isn't just the people in the Fnatic org. Like I'll always credit them. Up until last year, in my opinion, they did a fantastic job scouting talent, signing players, even to some degree keeping players. Like I know people are going, what do you mean keeping players? They let Caps and they let those players go when they had no choice, and the absolute best teams asking, like that was a scenario where anyone can lose their player like that. That didn't mean they weren't a good org. But the problem now is this. The main domino that fell was the Reckless domino. When Reckless told them, presumably just word of mouth, but guess what, Reckless? The words you say actually do mean something called being a man of your word. When you tell someone, it's all right, I'll resign, and then I start to build my team around you. First of all, I'm fucked if you leave because you're my main piece. But more importantly, he was the last connecting piece to the great eras when they were the best team. And there were still players, plenty of players in LEC who want to play with Reckless. Like there's not many other players in the LEC that have the same draw that he does. I mean, think about it. Like I think except for this split and one other, it's like every split he ever played, he was in the semis at least. Like a bad tournament was semis usually for him. So plenty of people, remember, I've never even been, like Odo Amner just made his first LEC final. So people like that, a secret that a lot of fans don't get, 'cause it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but a lot of people don't do it in their career, is the real secret to winning isn't just go with the guy who's hot now, it's go with the great player that's available. If you can get a couple of other great players around you, odds are as long as 2 or 3 out here in form, you're going to have an amazing team. So to me, Reckless actually essentially did fuck Fnatic. Like straight up. I even know that, listen, aside from Selfmade, who I heard maybe had some friction with him, I know the others in the team all liked him. They all liked playing with him. Yeah, they thought he had his flaws, but they thought he could play around it. He obviously was one of the best at his position and in the league, hence all the MVPs. So for me, the real joke of all of this is, guess who you should all hate now, Fnatic fans? Reckless. Ha! It's like I told you all along. There you go. You're all on my side in the end. Except you're not, of course, because you're all wearing fucking G2 jerseys now, aren't you? So
exactly.
It doesn't even matter
what
anymore.
You're talking about. They were never. Yeah. And that's the other problem that Fnatic had, was that they were never Fnatic fans. They were Reckless fans. So all those people are now gone, right?
Yes.
So it's
like all those fucking CLG fans who definitely just became Cloud9 fans, basically. It's definitely, because there's no way they'd go to TSM, is it? Because that's like, that one is too like night and day. So you just go to Cloud9, and it's a cool org as well. Nothing wrong with them.
That's right. Well, let's take a quick break, because I do want to get into the historical episode talking about Gambit and Moscow 5 and even Team Empire. Let's start with Team Empire before that, because this goes all the way back to like late 2011, early 2012. I reviewed some of this history, some of these games, so it should be pretty fun for us to talk about. So take a quick break, get Froggen on, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Summoning Insight. I had to take a break real quick, try and find a Gambit jacket, which the org sent to me a long time ago. I really love esports merch, and I just have boxes and boxes and boxes of it in my garage from esports history. Got a lot of classic items. And unfortunately, even though Gambit's a great team, sent it to me, couldn't actually find it. Someday I'll be able to actually decorate, frame all the jerseys. It'll be a good time.
Here's the problem though, Monty. There's an obvious question. Don't ever see you wearing it. And that's the biggest problem with esports merch, because here's the issue, right? I don't know if people know this, but unless you're getting some like dodgy knocked off one from China, if you buy like the real NBA jersey, like the one that they wear, the real replica, or an NHL jersey, the material's going to feel pretty nice, actually. Like it's a high quality item. That's why it costs like, I think the NHL jersey costs like $200 or something. Like it's not cheap. The ones they give you in esports, like, they feel like shit. It's like what I'm wearing now. It's like some shit you wear when you're like a kid playing football at school or something. They're like, right, one team with the red and one with the blue. It's like no one likes the feeling of that. It's just the nylon feeling, and it's just scratchy. So there's a reason why you're not wearing it all the time, Monty. It's just in a fucking box somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah,
your son to just go, what is all this shit?
That's why it needs to be displayed. That's why it needs to be displayed. But I've got some real classics, like a Rocks Tiger calendar from like 2014. Okay. Has great pictures of the teams. Like really cool shit.
Shout out to Jacob Wolf helping get that team destroyed.
Shout out indeed. Froggen's wearing a CLG EU shirt. in reference. He's got the Alliance in the background too. See, he's representing. He got some trophies on the shelf.
That's probably the saddest thing, actually, if you think about it, because we were talking about like CLG's history going down and stuff. Like, one of the first things that fucked them was obviously that Riot rule that you could only have one team in one league in League of Legends, so they had to give up the European team and you became evil geniuses. Like, in a world where you continued on with both teams, it'd be interesting. Maybe you'd still be I doubt he'd still be in CLG now, but maybe he would have played for him for more years. Who knows?
Maybe, yeah.
And in retrospect, they probably should have kept the European team and ditched the NA team. if we look at it historically. But let's start talking about Moscow 5 / Gambit, because I think this team is really, really interesting because I want to hear your take on the very start when they were Team Empire. Froggen, and if you, I don't even know if you ever played them when they were.
This is actually the era when Froggen wasn't actually technically a guy who played LANs yet. It was when he was like just about to join. I think it was like Absolute Legends or something, right? At the end of when you were playing all the Go for LOL Cups. So is this when you were just like an Anivia main playing Go for LOL Cups, basically?
I think first time I played them was in the Kings of Europe tournament, and we played them.
That's early 2012.
That was after they became Moscow 5.
Yeah,
so
that's correct. The only thing I remember from the Empire thing is the Nunu ultimate, of course.
The wombo combo, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I mean, I'm sure, by the way, he will have played the players though. Like at the time, like Alex Ich was a player who used to play in loads of these teams. I'm sure you must have played them in like a random match in other maybe in other teams and stuff. You know, I know they were in different squads before.
No, I actually
I
didn't play like a lot of against a lot of good teams before I joined Absolute Legends. I was on like pretty much just local teams, like other small teams, pretty much just with random players that I met throughout, and slowly like climbed my way up until Wicked asked to be on the same team. So I didn't really play against a lot of players.
Did you know that detail, by the way, Monty? Like, Froggen's origin story is actually like some shit that everyone will be able to relate to as a younger brother. Like, he was watching his older brother play exactly Anivia in League of Legends. And you know, when you're the younger brother, you're like, can I ever go on the PC? And so as a result, if you get a go, you're going to appreciate it more, right? Because you're finally able to play. Well, some would say his go still hasn't ended yet of playing Anivia. Like, still fucking playing it now, Monty. Like, it's like 10 years later or something.
I think what's great about certain aspects of video games. So there's some eternal truths to video games, like competitive games. And one of them is that move speed is always the most important ability, basically in any game. And the other one is any terrain manipulation will always make that character viable, no matter what. You see this in many metas in different games. If you have the ability to make walls, because at the top level, teamwork is everything. And if you can just isolate somebody, that character is always going to be at least playable, right? No matter what the meta is, which I think is
a skill matchup, for sure.
Which is, I think, what's great about Anivia, generally speaking, is that there is always a level of viability to playing that champ. So having mastery on it has served you well.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually one of the most like well-created champions in the game. Like everything just makes sense about her. So.
Well, especially to you, of course. Let's go back because we kind of skipped over some stuff. So if you guys don't know, there is a very famous, one of the most famous League of Legends plays of all time, came from Team Empire. And this was the same core that was Moscow 5 before they were Moscow 5 and Gambit, the original Gambit roster at least. And so what happened was that in the IEM Kiev qualifiers, and I believe these were in late 2011 or early 2012.
It was late 2011.
Late 2011. They were in the losers bracket and they were playing against SK Gaming. This was Ocelot's team at the time.
I think Snoopy was in the team, wasn't he? I think that's when he was in SK. It might even be Wicked and Snoopy at the time. I'd have to look it up, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, I actually don't know if they were both in that.
I might look it up now. Keep going anyway.
Yeah, so they were in this qualifier for IEM Kiev. And in the third game, the final game, and this game would determine who went to the LAN at IEM Kiev against SK. There was a play in the bot lane where they had a Nunu hidden in the brush. So Diamond Prox was sitting in the brush and did the ult and slowed multiple people. And then there was a Karthus ult from Alex Ich in mid lane, and it created this massive wombo combo that basically for years afterwards, people don't say it anymore, but for years afterwards, anytime there was like a massive damage combo, people would just yell Empire.
Yes. It was like shouting Corby when you shoot the ball and
exactly.
the thing in the basketball, the fucking waste paper basket, rather, the classic trope like that, yeah.
Oh, it was Ghost of Pepper on Nunu, excuse me. But there was a huge play that ends up occurring. And so this combo becomes very famous. It ends up being part of the game that knocks SK out of the qualifier. And so they don't go to IEM Kiev. So nobody knows about this team yet. And this was like the first big thing that they did. But then they go to IEM Kiev at the very beginning of 2012. And at this point, they've become Moscow 5. So that they've changed over into this new organization. And they end up actually winning the entire tournament. So this is a huge, huge surprise because this team, basically with 5 Russian dudes, came out of nowhere, killed SK Gaming.
I think technically Edward is Armenian or something, but like the others are Russian. Yeah. Yes. I believe he would always want me to explain that. You know?
Yeah, it's fair. That's fair enough. He is Armenian. So these guys end up knocking SK out, which is a huge upset. But then again, it was like losers bracket game 3 of a best of 3. Nobody really expects them to do well. Now they end up in a group with Dignitas Against All Authority and Team Cypher, who at the time had some players who did some stuff later, like Shlea and Moops, but not a lot of famous
European team, basically, yeah.
Yeah, and this was the Dignitas roster that had I Will Dominate, Voyboy, Skara, I'm a Cutie Pie, and Locust. So the kind of roster that became Dignitas and stayed Dignitas for some time. And this team ended up just sweeping their group, beating SK again in the actual playoff semifinals. And then they beat TSM, which was, again, a huge upset because TSM was so popular and they were, expected for us to, or they were expected to do very well, obviously, at this event. This is before NA fans had learned that NA sucked. So they always expected them to win at international events. And so this was kind of the rise of Moscow 5. And then where Froggen played them next was in a tournament called Kings of Europe, which was a French event.
It was online as well.
It was an online event, but it was run by Chips and Noir, the French casters. And this event, you guys at CLG EU, and this was right after you had dropped from, this is right after your roster had formed, correct? Because it was Absolute Legends and CLG EU combining, right?
It started as Absolute Legends, and then we wanted to change a couple of players because we also were in the IEM Kiev qualifier, which we actually qualified to, and then we decided we wanted to change, I think we changed 3 of our players, and then we couldn't go.
I think you're only allowed to change 2 for IEM rules or something, right?
Which is why the SK, I think, got into the main event. Yeah. Because they were the next team up, even though they failed technically to qualify.
So yeah, we changed to CLG EU after that. It was like a merge, and then I don't know, some shady stuff happened, I guess, and then it became CLG EU instead. Then our first tournament was Kings of Europe.
And so this happened. This happened like a week after IEM Kiev too. So it was really, really close to Moscow 5's victory. So what was so exciting about this event is that you guys ended up winning. So this really laid the foundation of what was at the time, and for years, really the most exciting European rivalry, like the classic CLG EU versus Moscow 5, which evolved into like EG versus Gambit.
Which was even a match later on for like Worlds decision and stuff. So yeah, it was
with the role swap,
right? Yeah,
with the role swap, which we'll get into. I'm very excited to talk about that. But yeah, so this was the first time that you had played against Moscow 5 in this Kings of Europe tournament, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I don't really know what we expected as CLG. I just remember we prepared like a lot versus Moscow 5 because all I remember is we looked at Diamond Prox's match history, and he has like 15 games of Mundo played, and like he's gonna play Mundo, and we gotta prepare something against this. So, I don't know, that was our first experience with them. They always do something like super innovative. I don't know how it's pronounced. Whatever.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And it just comes down to like preparing a lot against them and figuring out like how we are supposed to play, which is also why the matches drags out for a long time whenever we played them. Or whenever we would come back against them, it would be dragged out for a very long time. Because I mean, we have new stuff we have to deal with every time we play them, and it's very, very difficult. So it's kind of on the fly. We have to figure something out.
Yeah, that's also, by the way, the other thing that makes this seem like it fucking casting for an anime or something is like the two teams who had the rivalry were literally like the best late game team with all the scaling comps, and then the team that used to just smash everyone in like 15 minutes or something ridiculous. Oh, it was like the ridiculous cliche of like the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. That's why it was a classic matchup. Yeah.
And also just because you guys tended to play more, I would say like safe picks as opposed to play for
maybe not Wicked,
clearing.
but yeah, the others. I
Sure. But
I mean,
it's not like Moscow 5 that was known for doing very like weird picks or weird builds, especially Genja, like AD carry, like
Darian had some ridiculous picks.
Yeah, Darian having some ridiculous. So when you talk about the difficulty of preparing for these guys, how would you describe their style in the early days?
It kind of feels like, or felt like, it's kind of like 5 solo queue players that just do whatever they want to do. Whereas like they just leave each other alone and just try to like play their own style, and they somehow make it work kind of situation. It is quite a contrast to how we play, since we try to like get an understanding of how everybody wanted to play in CLGU, and then like try to plan something around that and have picks that make sense with each other. Where Moscow 5 is kind of like crazy. They just want to pick something and then they go do it, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it's GG and go next. But usually they would make it work, and they had really good like strategizing around the picks, or just knowing what's actually like a strong champion in League of Legends. They were super far ahead of everyone else, I think.
You know, one of the things that's always been memed to death is that infamous line they said where it was like "see hero, kill hero." Except except that like it should have been "see champion," but whatever. They were using the Dota terminology. Everyone knows that one: "see hero, kill hero." Like that's one of those lines that I feel like fans don't understand, because like that sounds like such a stupid thing. Well, obviously, like no. One of the things that made this team super good, and in my opinion, that's why I always contrast them with the G2 team that had perks. Is it's about follow up in League of Legends. Just go watch any LCS playoff series in the history of the fucking game. It's a bunch of players going, am I in? Am I out? Do I go on this one? Do I want this one? Are you in ink? Do I go for the team fight, or do I pull out at the last second? Like these guys, the joke is when they said "see hero, kill hero," that just means whenever someone goes in, we all go in and we either win or lose. And as mad as that sounds, like in League of Legends, it's like people always say it's better to have 5 people follow even a bad plan than 5 people have their own plan. So, like, to me, they were the ultimate example of that, because it seemed ridiculous at the time, because actually a lot of players, let's remember, this is the early days of League, there wasn't coaches and stuff. Like, everyone's basically a solo queue player who's just started playing League for the last year or so in real competitions. So, in some sense, they sort of harnessed the power of just being 5 disparate players and coming together. I mean, you guys did it a different way, but I always thought that was the thing that was mad underrated. Like, because the idea of "see hero, kill hero" is even if you go in and I'm like, I don't know about this, I just have to go in as well. I don't go, well, I'm just going to back out and let you die, do I? Otherwise, the team collapses.
I think that's also what actually made them popular and like famous. The next tournament after IEM Kiev, IEM Hanover, where they completely ran over like all competition in that tournament, and that was really when it started taking off with that kind of mindset for them, where people finally understood, okay, they kind of do whatever the hell they want. It's where they started doing the thing with Alistar. They roam, he gets level 2, roams around all the time, and Genja's solo lane spot with Urgot with blue buff from level 1. It's like,
as you do.
as you do. Completely normal, you know?
Dude, the best thing is, at the time, I didn't know I Will Dominate, right? It was years later that I did like my show with him and stuff. And so I've now been able to actually get the other side of that story, Monty. And it is hilarious because, like, what people never think about, let's face it, no one gives a fuck about junglers. So no one thinks, what would it be like to be the jungler in, I think it was even in game 1, Monty, of a final that you're hoping you can win. And then the game starts and there's 2 motherfuckers in your jumbo, like, flashing to, like, kill you, etc. And then they're just 1v2 bot lane. And then you're like, oh, so the whole game's just ruined from literally like level 2 or something. Oh, cool. Yeah, I guess I'll just keep playing then. I'm sure that was a fun game.
It is just amazing, like the level of innovation that they had. And I think if we look back in retrospect too, especially players like Diamond Prox, if you want to know who really invented a lot of the farming jungle metas. It was Diamond Prox, especially like running champions like Shyvana, which no one else was playing at the time. And
farming
basically
the opponent's jungle though. Yeah,
he was basically just pathing Nirvana, going around stealing all of the camps. And at the time, it's hard to describe because no one else was really doing that. But he would pick these champions that could just clear with extreme speed and just get huge level advantages, which is kind of what we see in the current jungle meta is more or less what like Diamond Prox was trying to do, right? But it was also the information he was able to get, just constantly like checking and seeing the other jungler. So it was very difficult, I think, probably to play against him. Do you remember Snoopy having any frustration on that front?
No, I don't really think we had any problems playing against Diamond Prox because we kind of know or knew what he was going to do. And Snoopy always plays CC champions, and I play high damage burst mages, so it's somewhat easy because they're not. Like, I don't think Diamond Prox was in sync with Dari and Alex a lot, so it's kind of like we can just go kill him whenever, which is actually what ended up happening in a lot of the games. I think I think people have a misconception of CLGEU where we're just only stalling the game, but there's a lot of games against them where we just smash them in early game. And it's like we didn't really have that many issues. From my memory at least, against like playing against it. Then the same thing for Alex is like, well, he's kind of doing the same playstyle as you should be doing in season 2, whereas like the Raptors have like a 30 or 40 second spawn time. Well, you're gonna go take them all the time because it's the most effective thing you can do. So it ends up being kind of like everybody's just farming in the end because it's how the game is designed right there and then. So
what was your
experience? By the way, even though I obviously do want to give them credit for all the innovations and stuff, we're going to go through some of these specific ones like the Diamond Prox one, and maybe we'll talk about Darien and Genji, and we'll get through everyone, I'm sure, eventually. One thing that has been actually very fun is, because I knew this from like being friends with a couple of them back in the day, but I actually got to reveal it to Monty on shores. I would never get, by the way, I know what I'm box office. I don't like reveal the plot before it happens. Like I want the Red Wedding to fucking happen where you don't know. So as a result, I never tell Monty what I'm going to do on the show. So basically what I did is I purposely set it up because I knew that Monty, right? Because he was watching all the best Koreans and Chinese players play. He's trying to reverse engineer why what they're doing is like carefully planned and strategized. Like, right. So they understood that like, you know, this damage item stacks like this. And if you used it in a certain way, it procs twice. And what's great is Monty was trying to do that for all these crazy shit that they were doing. But when I would bring them all on the shows, everyone with the exception of like Genji in a fucked up way and maybe like Diamond Prox, he was actually pretty intelligent. All the others, they will literally admit like, I was just making shit up on the spot. Like I had no idea what I was doing. Like Darien, like everyone likes to credit, for example, like Darien, like, oh, he had this genius style where he knew like as a top lane, you're never quite out of it. So if you can still get kills and items, you'll be. He didn't do that. He was literally just going like, I kill him next time. He killed me. How dare he? Like he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't doing that slick shit. But this is also, it's kind of a sign of the times though, because in season 2, the period we're talking about, because the game hadn't been figured out and the meta was still changing because they were still patching like a motherfucker back then. It was no LCS. It used to be a world where people back then thought there was a global meta. Like, for example, the reason Diamond Prox was shocking is because everyone thought the global meta is you play like Snoopy, you play like a tanky champion that, like he says, like you play like Malphite or something, and then basically you just have the Heart of Gold item and you don't need to farm. You give Froggen all the camps and then you just maybe even the blue buff at some time, you know. So in that scenario, when this guy comes along, even if it is not all of his ideas are like legit, they're going to go so against the grain that if they work, they're going to work like nothing else because like no one else is doing that shit.
Yep. And I think that's what was so frustrating to play against too, is that they just did have this there wasn't a way to practice to play this team, and there wasn't a way to really understand how they were going to win games a lot of the time, because I mean, they didn't even know, or they were playing some weird pick. We saw a bunch of this stuff too, where it was like, basically anyone was going to do, there was going to be one player in every game who was going to be on a weird pick or taking a conventional pick and playing it weirdly, whether it was like a Kog'Maw with Trinity Force or like a Corki with Randuin's Omen for no reason. I mean, Genja was kind of like the king of supportive AD carries. I don't even know how to describe him. I really wonder what it was like to play against him in lane at the time. But were you confused a lot of the time by what Genja was doing in these games?
Yeah, I think half the things he did was just so dumb, and the other half was like really, really genius.
Yes, he was like a savant, wasn't he? Yeah.
No, but like in Kings of Europe, there was a new item build that he came up with, and it was boots, triple Dorns into Phantom Dancer, and you have Rico's Lantern, and it's like, what the fuck is this? Like, but apparently it just wins against everything, so everybody else started copying it. Then other times, well, he has Trinity Force and Randuin's and Corki, and it's just useless. Like, what the hell is it supposed to do? You know, it does nothing. So I don't know. He has some smart things, and then the other things.
I can even tell you a mad detail about that because I actually got to do one of the rare interviews with Genja, and it's in Russian. It won't be on my channel; it'll be on like the Acer Esports channel, but it'll still be on YouTube if people want to look it up. And basically, because I got to interview him and Edward, I got some mad stories. Like basically, when Genja would play in lane, even though he was on the team that was winning and he was doing all this weird shit, most of the players that played against him would be like, it's very weird to play him though, because it's almost like he lets himself get in danger of like the support hitting like the skill shot on them, like like an army bubble or something. And the reason why is this, Monty, it's so nuts. Genja basically thought he was like Uzi I, mate. Like he thought he was the genius who just understood the whole game, right? So in his philosophy, for real, he actually was a true AD carry. He didn't believe it was about getting kills in lane. He thought AD carry was, I farm the minions till I have my items, I join the team fight, and I kill people. So I don't have to kill people before that. So basically, for real, he thought of Edward and all his supports as his like bodyguard. Like, it's your job to stop him hitting the fucking skill shot on me, mate. And there's a mad story where one of his supports told me that Genja's style is, if he wants you to like, fucking like play up in a certain situation or like not check something, he wouldn't tell you that. He would just let you like face check the brush, die, like he'd back off and let you die. And then next time he would just basically be like, don't do that again or something. Like, imagine playing with someone like this. It actually sounds so mad.
Well, later on, I think Edward had enough of that, because there was a time where he like left Gambit for a bit, and I can understand why after years of putting up with
they were like a style mismatch. Although bizarrely, I will say that's actually the interesting part for me about the team. A lot of the other players actually fit, but because Genja and Edward was so like chalk and cheese, you'd say in English. It's just two things that don't go together, basically. So, like, somehow there was like a creative tension that when it worked, it was brilliant, though. Because as a result, if you have like a super passive Genja, well, if you put a super passive support player with him, like, I don't know, fucking Nif back in the day or something, that'd be terrible. Like, that'd be a lane that could never win. If you have Edward, though, and he's going to like flash forwards or like fucking blitzcrank or something and do a crazy play, you can't just go in on Genja all the time. There's a mad way. It's sort of like they sort of held each other in check to some degree. Keyword some degree.
Okay, let's keep talking about some of these events that were happening, because
sure.
I want to go back to Kings of Europe, because this really set up the rivalry. And I'm curious, Froggen, did you perceive Moscow 5 as like the main threat? Did you consider them your rival after that event, or were you still thinking about some other teams? Was this because it really was the start of something that would last for years and years and years after that?
I think I was just playing for fun, to be honest. Like, I don't know. It's like my first tournament. I was still going to school, I just turned 18. I wasn't even 18 at the time. Like, I was just chilling. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to play some Enevia. This is going to be fun, kind of thing, So, I mean, I don't think we could expect Gambit to, like, turn out to be the Gambit that we now know. Like, it came after they started winning a couple of tournaments. Of course, there's that whole thing where they... I don't know. They have a problem banning out certain champions against players because they really want to win against like whatever champion.
They had like an ego angle, right? Like, yeah, they wanted to kind of give you the champion and prove they could beat it, right?
Yeah. But I didn't realize it was gonna be a rivalry at that time. And honestly, CLG, we didn't even like qualify for anything at the time, so it's like hard to. I mean, if you can't qualify for anything, it's hard to have a rivalry against a team that's winning all the offline tournaments. So.
Yeah, that was also the other thing to mention, Monty, is initially before they played like the DreamHack Summer or whatever, they actually had the opposite reps, which was that CLGU was the team that was amazing online, but they went to their first LAN, some shit French team you don't need to know about, and didn't do very well. So they were considered onliners. Meanwhile, because Moscow 5's in Russia and you're not going to get amazing ping to a server in like, I don't know, Amsterdam or Germany or something, they obviously used to be like, oh, well, even if they lose online, who cares? They'd smash everyone on LAN. So actually everyone was so hyped for them to actually properly meet and see, like, let's see what happens if they play a proper LAN match,
When was the first LAN match that you actually had versus them? Do you recall?
Isn't it the group stage DreamHack Summer?
Yeah,
it's the one that goes like 70 minutes or something, isn't it? Isn't that the game?
It's a massive comeback, yeah. Wait, that might be.
Or was the one before that? Yeah, that might be the decider.
I think that might
be
one
right?
before.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember for that game they turned up like 20 minutes late, like off schedule, and just being like, "Well, what the fuck? We're supposed to play." So that was
Don't worry, that is a classic move that like CIS esports people are notorious for that. And Counter-Strike Na'Vi used to do the same thing. Because you're talking about like tournaments that back in the day, they're not going to disqualify you if you're like the #1 team. Mate, those guys used to love just rocking up half an hour late, like, all right, we'll just set our gear up now. So they're not going to disqualify you. So you just do it as like an intimidation factor or something, or just lazy. One of the two.
Yeah. But I think our rivalry started with DreamHack Summer for sure because of the massive comeback. And then we also won in the finals against them again.
Yes.
So that's when it really started. And then also they were known for being that kind of like a villain, you know, they don't want to do all this like stuff with signing autographs, doing all the friendly stuff. They go play their tournaments, they go be themselves, and then they just arrive and they like look pissed or upset or something about anything really. Whereas CLG was like, we were kind of known for being the exact opposite.
Sure.
So.
Yes. You know, by the way, that essentially, Monty, means that game of League of Legends, the classic one that's like 68 minutes or whatever.
61 minutes.
It's basically like LS's dream game of League of Legends, because one team that has, like, in theory, the really good late game comp just does wait forever farming under tower in a way you can't now, like at the inhibs, until they finally get like one slightly dodgy engage from the opponent and then just win the game off it or something. Like, it was actually like, put it this way, it's one of those ones where even though it was so hyped, it's like, it wasn't a great game to watch. I'll tell you right now. It was exciting. Wasn't a great game to watch, though.
Most games against them 5 wasn't great to watch, to be honest. But it's hype.
Sure.
Yeah, it was hype at the end, and this was one of your classic Anivia games too, where you could just wave clear forever.
Yes.
And you also had Crepo on Soraka, you had Yellow Pete on Tristana, Snoopé on Alistair, and Wicked on Aurelia, whereas Darien was it was Vlad, Lee, Karthus, Corki, and Nunu on Moscow 5.
Which is a bit weird setup.
They had the classic combo from the Empire days. It was something that they continued to use for a while, which was, if I recall correctly, which is the Nunu and Karthus. So it would pop up here and there. And this is the game you guys won in group stage. And like you said, it was this was the game you played, and then you rematched in the final and you won 2-0. So you actually 3-0'd Moscow 5 in this entire tournament. But what was the atmosphere within the team like? Describe what it was like playing that comeback game. It was 61.5 minutes in length. So it's definitely one of the longest League of Legends games of all time. And I think it was the longest game of League of Legends played when it was played.
I think we have a 71 or 72 minute game against
that would not surprise me. Do you remember when that was?
Well, I remember Alex was playing Malphite and I was playing Anivia in that one too. So I mean, there's so many tournaments that the bots have been lost because of different sites that were used back in 2012, which is unfortunate. And own TV, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, that was
which doesn't exist anymore, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, at DreamHack, I remember because we were sitting on. It's kind of like there was a barrier between us and Moscow 5. So we're sitting on one side. There's a barrier, and they're sitting on the other side. So it's kind of like if we shout loud, it's kind of like we can hear each other because we don't have these helicopter headsets at the time. We're just using our own, whatever we bring. So, I mean, we're just sitting there chilling, not really a lot going on, just being like, girl, let's try to stall. They're going here. Let's try to wave clear this. Let's try to wave clear that. But the time where we started getting really strong and stuff, we started like trying to actually formulate plans. And of course, there's no dragon soul. For the ones that don't know, it just gave gold, flat gold. So there's not really a win condition like that. And the super creeps were like, or the super creeps and just bare and up creeps were like really squishy on top of that. So it gave region or something. It gave some weird stats, I think. Holy shit, it's been a while, but that was not really a good way to end the game. So if you just have an Anivia, you can kind of stall for forever, which is what happened.
Yeah, the famous stall champs back in the day were Anivia and Ziggs primarily. Just incredibly, you could basically stall out a game forever with one of those two champions.
And
because
when Lux became meta, that came too because the ultimate was like a ridiculous 16 or 18 second cooldown, and the minion wave spawn every 30 seconds, so you can never push. Like literally, you can never push.
So you say this DreamHack was really the start of the rivalry that you had, and this is something that would continue until the end. Well, for years, but especially until the end of 2012, because you guys were definitely in contention, both of you, for the title.
They could have met in the final.
They could have met in the finals of Worlds. Yeah. So there's definitely something that people expected might happen again. Now,
basically, if you could get a time machine, here's what you do if you're an EU fan. You go back. I mean, sadly, on the Moscow 5 one, you'd have to actually like physically take the keyboard, because just telling them ban Italy, they wouldn't do it like he said before. Like they were doing it as an ego move, like we can beat it. So for Moscow 5, you have to physically do it. For CLGU, you just have to tell fucking Yellow Pete, like, stay away from that fucking Skarner. Don't go near that Skarner. That instant still burned into my fucking brain. Like, because you know the feeling of like the Skarner won't last so long as they're dragging them. It's like, it's the worst feeling ever. You know, you just fucked at that point in time. It's over. It's over.
Yeah. No, I mean, we had definitely had some ego on CLGU too. That's for sure. But, I mean, people were super mad at the Season 2 World Finals with there was no third, fourth place decider because everybody wanted to see us play.
Oh, it would have been cool.
It would have been cool. One of the very few times that I would have actually enjoyed a third, fourth place decider. You know what I would enjoy more? Double elimination, but we'll never be able to.
You know, I would enjoy more just being able to play the tournament and just have each person play one game and then not do stuff like someone be 10 minutes ahead in the game, then restart the whole game. Shout out World Elite, shout out fucking Round of 8, shout out Riot Game, shout out pizza for everyone, shout out DJ Wheat having to give the apology. What a clusterfuck that whole tournament was, mate. I think basically we should just delete that one from our memory. I know it was a baller tournament, like the results, but like, man, so like the match that you guys had against World Elite, it's like that shouldn't even count, mate. I think you played something mad like 4 games in like a best of 3 or something, right? We restarted a couple of times.
We finished 2 games and that took 6 hours, 6 or 7 hours. So.
What I remember, so for those of you who don't know, there were technical issues at that World Championship.
Mega ones.
Really, really bad ones. So it basically created a scenario where they had to fill time for something like 7 or 8 hours. Because I was there on site, and I just remember sitting in the ESPN zone listening to Silver Scrapes on a loop for 8 hours because they didn't have.
So you already have PTSD from 2012 over Silver Scrapes. I've got it for about 5 years, but you had it in 2012. Fair enough,
dude. I have such Silver Scrapes PTSD because it was so. Let me describe the situation. So there were other problems too, because the quarterfinals were taking place outside at LA Live. So there were sun issues. So the problem with esports being outside, for those of you who don't know, is that whenever this happens, one of the following things will occur inevitably, which is the PCs will overheat. That happens a lot outside. So people will lose frame rate because it's just hot in the sun, or the PCs aren't cooled properly, or the technical equipment will overheat. So it's like lights or LED panels, which is why if you're ever in a studio, they're always so fucking cold because it's keeping all the PCs and all this like equipment that runs hot cool. Or the third thing is the sun will inevitably move and get in the player's eyes. Cause I remember being at that event and having them have to like rig up these like things to block the light from the player's eyes, or it'll reflect on the screen somehow to cause glare. So it's very rarely.
That's the only reason TSM lost fans. It was the bloody sun was in Reggie's eyes. Can't blame him for that. Just human.
So inevitably these things happen at one of the tournaments. But what was unique about this event is that there was a kind of an unexplained technical glitch that caused your match to be delayed for 8 hours. And in LA Live at the time,
reasonable.
Where the ESPN office is now was a restaurant called the ESPN Zone, which we were all hanging out in. I remember you, Froggen, like they had a huge arcade there. We were all chilling. I was, working for GG Chronicle, my site, writing stories, doing interviews with you guys. So what were they telling you while you were sitting on that stage? Because my experience was watching this, but just what they did is they pumped Silver Scrapes into the restaurant, the bar and restaurant ESPN Zone. So everyone in there was just listening to it on a loop for no joke, like 8 hours. So I still have every time I hear Silver Scrapes, my association is just sitting in this ESPN Zone and listening to it forever on this loop, which was horrible.
Just in purgatory.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the beginning of a bad fucking ketamine trip where you've just got into a K-hole and you just hear it forever.
See, I had a great time on the stage. We were talking to our sound guy. I think he was called Josh, and we just had live karaoke. Like we're just singing songs. And honestly, World Elite was super jet lagged, so they were falling asleep at their PCs. So we were like, "Well, this is gonna be a free win if you're gonna play again." Like, goddamn. So I know it was great for us.
But you never actually got to play that game. It was actually completely delayed.
Yeah,
it was played the next week.
It was, yeah. So we got to scrim against TPA for like a week, and then we had to play World Elite 1 game again while they were building the Galen Center, I think it was.
Yeah, and it was. I think it was streamed, right? I'm trying to remember. It was streamed, but there was no crowd or anything like that. They had to move it.
Yeah, like the center was literally being set up while we were playing the game, so it's just like construction in the background with, I think,
basically like playing in LCS finals now.
Yeah, basically.
You guys were ahead of the time. You were the innovating the meta back then.
Yeah.
So what I understand happened in that game. So here's what I heard about why this delay occurred. So there was a rotating stage. So if you remember this, Froggen.
I love the way Riot never learns, by the way. We're going to have our first really big world championship. Last time was just a tournament at DreamHack. So you know what? Since we've never run a giant tournament before, I think we should probably have it outdoor in LA in the heat with the sun, and it should probably be set up with like internet that's questionable, no backups, of course, wouldn't want those. And let's also have the stage rotating somewhere so that wires, for example, have to be like, these guys are unreal. What next? Just have people fucking parachute in each player. So if one shoot doesn't open, it just dies. Well, what is this, Riot?
There was a logic to the rotating stage, which I think was actually good. But first off, it was cool because nobody had ever really done anything like that before. But second off, this was before in 2012. This is before we had kind of basically, for those of you who don't know, the way that esports events work right now is that players have practice PCs backstage. They are given a hard drive, like a solid state drive, to set up and set their settings on. And then the refs take this drive and then just hot swap it into PCs on stage. But at the time, that technology really didn't exist. So what ended up happening is the players needed time in order to set up all their hotkeys, all their settings, everything like that. And this would create longer breaks, basically. So Riot's solution to this, which did make sense at the time, was that they were going to have this rotating stage with two sets of PCs so that one team, while one game was going on, the next two teams would be on the other side of this wall setting up their PCs, right? Isn't that how it worked, Froggen? Isn't that what you were doing?
I don't remember how we set up, to be honest.
But
yeah, I mean, it sounds about right.
So basically, as soon as the previous game was done, then the stage would rotate, right? And you would see the other set of PCs and players, and then people would be ready to go. So it was a legitimate way to, first off, it was a cool reveal of the teams. And second off, it was a way to eliminate as much downtime as possible in an era where it was difficult to do this. Now, what I heard, I don't know if this is true. This is the rumor that I heard, was that in the process of the stage rotating, the thing that caused the delay was that it severed the internet cables underneath the stage.
Who knew the stage turning could rip out a wire? Who knew?
So what I heard was that it severed the internet cables underneath the stage and they couldn't communicate with the server, and they couldn't figure out why they couldn't communicate with the server because it was actually a physical issue of like the cables having been cut.
Right.
But I don't know if that's what I heard. I don't know if that was ever like confirmed. And it was also like they couldn't figure it out that entire day, but I think that was actually the reason.
Listen, they were just a small indie company who were inventing esports, Monty. There was no one in Korea.
If that's the reason, this happened multiple times though. Like throughout those many hours, like they can't keep cutting the cables.
I think or the cables were damaged, so they were giving some sort of intermittent signal. There was something. That's what I heard. I don't know if it's true, guys. That was the
could
rumor,
also have been all of the above. Like it could have been, maybe it was a cable first, then because you played on stage for so many hours in the sun, something overheats. I could imagine many of the contingencies coming to play at that point in time. Unfortunately.
So yeah, that's the story. So your side, but the Gambit side, while we're looking at that same event, to kind of roll back. Now, the reason why we kind of skipped from DreamHack to the World Championship is that you guys didn't really play that much after DreamHack because you went to
They just played at the Polish tournament in the final. Yeah. They had a rematch, like it was part of like the circuit that qualified you into the regional. So they played at a tournament there, and basically the same thing happened. Like they played in the group stage. I think in the group stage you won again, and then in the final they like got revenge or something. But obviously at the regional you didn't meet because some shit happened with RNA and all that we don't talk about. So
Yep.
Never, that game never happened. There was no semi-final in that one. Just bizarrely, they just went to the final. So who knows how it worked? Never happened, right, Froggen? Never happened.
No, never happened indeed. But I mean, yeah, I guess it's mostly a GEU story. But we actually had to play them at or do well at the IEM. Like, I don't know, the one in Poland, wherever it was, Katowice.
ECC Poland or whatever it was called. Yeah, European Championship Challenger Circuit or whatever the fuck. Yeah.
We had to do well in that one in order to qualify.
Because obviously your team had never been to the IEMs, right? You hadn't been at Kiev and Hanover and stuff, so you didn't have the points that they do, right?
Exactly. So we had to reschedule OGN games in order to play those games in Poland. So we were there for like 36 hours and we had to play them.
That's so insane.
So
still made the final of OGN though. Just fuck around and make an OGN final. Not bad.
No, actually, our OGN schedule was insane because we were traveling back and forth between like Europe and Korea all the time, which is like 15-hour back and forth, having to like deal with jet lag. So we actually never got to practice for OGN. We got to practice the first 2 weeks, I think, and we got smashed for 2 weeks straight. And then we stopped practicing and we had to just travel around and play the games, and we started winning. So I guess that's kind of saved us in the end.
It's amazing you were able to make the finals of both the ECC Poland event and the OGN Summer, given that schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We just had so much preparation. It was the only thing we could do. We couldn't practice against anyone, so it was just preparation the entire time.
There's the other thing, Monty. Third thing that an EU fan needs to do with the time machine. So you go back and you tell Moscow 5 but in Italy, you make sure Yellow Pete keeps his fucking ass away from that SCADA. Third one, you go before the blind pick game in OGN final and go Froggen. Maybe a Nivea. Seems like
my Diana was crazy. My Diana was crazy. I was 1v9. Also, the champion was fucking broken, by the way.
Yes. Oh, we'll say, by the way, if you ever watched the game, you were actually 1v9, but the problem is that the game was so out of hand. Like everyone else just fucking lost the map, basically. It was over already. Yeah.
True. Let's not get in the rabbit hole of the game 5 of the summer finals, where you were one game away from becoming the first Western team to ever win a major final in Korea, which had to happen. Unfortunately, you know what's crazy, Frog, and what I will say is that 2012 summer final, that was the closest a team you were the closest anyone ever got until Overwatch in 2017, when Envy actually took down a Korean team in a major Korean final. So it took another 5 years for that even to be a possibility, right? So it really does say a lot about your guys' level of accomplishment.
And how good Koreans are.
Yeah, sure. So you're bouncing back and forth between Europe, and you end up playing them in this tournament. You do lose to them in the finals, and then you end up in these qualifiers for Europe, and you don't hit each other because you end up losing to SK in the semis. So you take third place, but you still end up at the World Championship. Now, the reason why people thought Moscow 5 was the favorite, because people like to rewrite history, but I think most people's assumption was not that Frost was going to win, because here's the thing. They had just seen you in a finals, CLGU versus Frost, right? And it was a really, really close series. And then you end up taking third place, not first place in the qualifier for
the regional,
for the regionals, right? And this was the last OGN tournament that happened prior to Worlds. So most people are thinking, oh, okay, they're going to be Azubu Frost is going to be a good team.
Shall I do the rundown for you, Monty? This is one of the things I can do. I didn't prep for this show, but here we go. Right? So the round of 8 at this tournament, if people don't know, it was Moscow 5 played against Invictus Gaming. Invictus Gaming had like 14-year-old Z-Tie or something ridiculous, but they were just a team with like skilled players, but they weren't the top Chinese team. They were like, China at the time was very undeveloped. It was basically just World Elite. World Elite played on the other side of the bracket against CLGU, and World Elite actually just had made the roster moves basically to bring in, like, I think Claylove and FZZF or whatever, the support in the jungle. Before that, when they played in OGN, they had a different lineup. It wasn't as good. This lineup, by the way, actually did end up being incredible. Like, this is the team that after Worlds won something mental, like LAN and online combined like 33 matches in a row or something. Then you had TSM, who had won all the like NA tournaments, but obviously famously had a terrible record against Asian teams and never could beat them. And they were playing against Frost, who, as you say, might have lost that OGN final. Were kind of a team that, like, that was kind of an escape to win that final. And then the other match was Taipei Assassins versus Najin and Sword. Naj and Sword hadn't even been expected to be there. They were actually the team that Froggen beat in the semis, but they won some epic game 5 against the Reapered Blaze, which actually got Reapered kicked out of the team. And then obviously TPA was a team that had like the sleeper hype of like players knew they were good, but they hadn't really they hadn't been to any of the big international tournaments, so no one knew they were, and they hadn't been in OGN, so no one knew if they were actually good or not. So if you look at the lineup there, actually the two favourites realistically is probably Moscow 5 and CLGU. Like their teams have won tournaments, had success, like done a lot of things. At this point in time, Moscow 5's only lost on land to CLGU. Like these are the two teams that it wouldn't be unfair to say they're the favourites to win the whole thing.
Yeah, and especially because Moscow 5 really dominated the European qualifiers, as I recall. Like it was pretty clear that they were the #1 team from those qualifiers. So I think coming in, there was always the hype around Taipei Assassins, but because of the rumors from Asia about their power. But for the most part, I think people were focused on M5, like Moscow 5, you guys, CLGU, Azubu Frost, and TPA is like a dark horse. So I actually think that we probably got the semis. Like I think the top 4 teams of this tournament were in the semifinals, which is rare for a world championship because you don't have a losers, there's no double elimination, right? But I do think that the top 4 teams ended up in the semifinals of this event.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because both us and Moscow 5 lost, but I think World Elite is like could be top 4 potentially. Like it's arguably for sure. Because they were incredibly good. They just happened to lose to us, like 2-1, both in OGN and at Worlds, which is really, really unfortunate for them. Kind of how we lost to a Super Frost, 1-2 and 2-3. I kind of think all 5 of those teams are about the same skill level, and really anyone could win those.
The other thing to add as well, by the way, is even though Koreans were as good as the other teams, they weren't like ahead at this point in time. Like they were in Korea. If you go to Korea and play them, we'll kill everyone. But you saw in these tournaments, like they can be beaten, they can lose games. Like this wasn't like the following years where you got the teams that were like SK Telecom in season 3, and no one was going to beat them in the series. Like realistically, Koreans were still like at a similar level back then, right?
I mean, Koreans were incredibly good just from playing their solo queue. Even though they had solo queue for 6 months.
Yes.
By OGN Summer. Like I mean, they were insane compared to other solo queues. So I mean, they're good. They're good at the game somehow.
So my question is, did you think? How would you have, prior to the Season 2 World Championship, how would you have ranked the teams? Because you had an opportunity, I think, to practice against TPA while you were in Korea, right? So you must have had a very good insight into how good the teams were coming into this.
He might even have played them. I don't know. Because another thing we didn't mention, by the way, is there was a lot of online tournaments back then. And even in Korea, they would have them. Like in Korea, they would have those like super fights. And they would have like, if CLG was there, they'd play maybe TPA. So did you ever play them in one of those? Do you ever play many matches?
Well, part of our crazy schedule in Korea was after we won the semifinals against Najin, we had like 10 days or something till we had to play a Super Frost in the finals. We went to Taiwan for 7 or 8 days.
Yeah, there was
you went to their regional.
You played at. Yes. There was the mall you played at.
You went to their regional for Taipei, etc. Yeah.
We boot camped against TPA like a week. And that's when the Froggen DDoS thing started. So shout out to Ocelot for that too. That was great. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the shopping mall in Taiwan, I have never seen anything crazier than that in esports. Like even now, it's like nothing actually beats it. The shopping mall was like completely packed on like 7 stories, and people were going up and down in elevators.
Well, they kind of treat you like rock stars as well, because you were kind of like brought in as like the big team or some shit, right? It's actually a thing where I know it won't be online now because you'll have to use like archive.org or something. But actually, a guy from Monty's site at the time called Obscurica wrote like a very good piece about this exact environment. Sadly, he's one of those people that politics broke his brain and basically ruined him. So, oh well, whatever. Another body in the fucking rumble. But yeah, go on, tell us the story then, Froggen.
Yeah, no, when we arrived at the shopping center, there was lines on lines on lines going all the way around the building. And when we get in, they're telling us, please wait in this area. Please don't leave. People here, like, they're gonna go crazy. Like, we don't want you to we don't want anything to happen to you, kind of thing. Please don't go interact with them, kind of thing. As in, like, what the fuck? This is dangerous, kind of situation. We're like, what the hell is going on? we're just chilling. We want to go out, take some pictures and stuff, meet the fans, and they're like, oh, be careful.
So I remember I'm trying to Google a picture of this, but I can't find it. But I do remember watching it and seeing the pictures. And it was like there was like this central part of this mall, and there was a stage in the middle. And then there were these 7 stories looking down onto the stage, like all around. And there were tens of thousands of people there that were just jammed onto like every single level, just looking down at this stage. And it was crazy. It was I was shocked. I heard, I think somebody told me, I don't know if this is true, that there were like 50K people there or something like that. It was insane.
I would believe it. Like, it was big. It is the most insane thing I've ever seen. I heard stories about people were like, they knocked down a wall or some shit. I don't know how true this is either, but like, it was crazy there. And all of that was just for a show match. Like, it wasn't even like a competition or a tournament. It was just a show match, us against the TPA.
So anyway, the original topic, were they actually, did you actually know they were good at the time? Did you have any hype that they might be like the top team?
I mean, they were good, but like, it's not as in like, wow, they're like beating us up kind of good. It was kind of like, I think maybe 60% us, 40% them kind of situation.
Okay.
It wasn't kind of like, it wasn't out of this world kind of thing. But what I do remember though is one reason I think they actually were really good is they were super, super friendly with each other. Like, just being a group of friends kind of thing, like we were in CLGEU as well, and all of them just having a good time playing the game, like having fun with it. And they were on extremely strict schedules too, where at 11 p.m., no phones, no anything, lights out. They got to go to bed. They had bunk beds there. They had like they actually had a pretty nice gaming house. It's like 2 stories or something with some insane view in Taiwan, but it was some very, very strict schedule, and it's like a regular Danish dude just turning 18, always lived at home kind of thing, seeing this. I was like, "What the fuck? Like, I can't even use my phone. Like, I can't play. Like, goddamn." That is unusual for me.
Yeah, I think it's you have to remember that this was in the very early days of esports where there was no infrastructure, especially in League of Legends, because everything was so new. So basically the players were running everything. So to have a team that actually had any structure was rare, was very rare. Even the Korean teams, because this was before the Kespa teams had entered the fray and brought with them a lot of the coaching and infrastructure that they offered, because there were all of the historic teams at this time in Korea were not part of League of Legends. It was before,
as far as I know, though, that's actually another area where TPA was like hailed as like being ahead of the game. Like, I think they were one of those teams that came with like 3 or 4 like manager, coach type people who were with you. And like at the time, this is when teams just didn't even have coaches; they didn't exist. Even some of the Korean teams, it was just the manager basically. It was whoever got them the team house, etc. There wasn't the same infrastructure like you're saying.
So it doesn't sound like you were blown away by TPA. No. Did that mean that you also thought that you or Frost or potentially Moscow 5 were the favorites coming into the Season 2 World Championship? Because the perception from the outside, given your performance, because in a way your team was the benchmark. It was the measuring stick because you had competed in multiple regions. So the logic was, if you guys are doing this well in Korea, barely losing to Frost, Moscow 5 is dominating Europe. Well, then Moscow 5, Europe is probably the overall strongest region, and Moscow 5 must be the best team.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I think we were playing against TPA so much because we knew we weren't going to meet them. Like, we very likely weren't going to meet them. So the thing with we had practice partners for after we beat World Elite. Obviously, like, we will choose whoever we scrim and stuff, right? So you basically have the choice of you either scrim Gambit or you scrim a Super Frost, because those two are the other two on like in the other semifinal, right? So I think the logic was that we played TPA because we think we won't meet them, and Gambit will play Frost because they think they won't meet them, which I guess was sound logic in the end, but that's how we decided it. We definitely thought both us and Gambit were gonna be, or Moscow 5 were gonna be in the World Finals.
Were you surprised at the results with TPA and with your rematch with Frost? Because again, the semifinal was again extremely close with you guys and Frost, and also Moscow 5 and TPA. I mean, they were both really exciting series.
I think I'm more surprised that Moscow 5 lost against TPA than, because we already lost once against Frost, so we kind of like, it could happen kind of situation. Like, I mean, you can't really get surprised by it the second time if it happens, I suppose. But I think our matchup was much more 50-50 than the other matchup.
The real irony to me, Monty, is one of the reasons also why Moscow 5 was actually, this is like the prime period for them, is because unlike all the other big Western teams, with the exception of TSM, who even still got to play Koreans when they came to that MLG at the fucking New York offices, everyone else had interacted with Koreans in some way. They'd been towards Yen and lost to them and therefore thought they were good. Or Moscow 5 still just chilled in Europe the whole time. And when they were chilling there, as we talked about, they didn't buy into the meta of what Koreans and people are doing global. They just did whatever they wanted. So in theory, right, one of the things that made Moscow 5 hard for Koreans, for example, is you have to play them a couple of times to learn how they play. Well, the real irony of ironies, Monty, is that is basically what a Moscow 5 would tell you about this TPA team, because famously they had all those like creative level ones that Mistake designed and stuff. So actually, if they could have played this team a couple of times, maybe they would be. So I actually think the fact that they'd never ever played these two teams is probably what made that game such a weird match, you know.
I'm curious if you think that had you had opposite matchups, so in a world where you played Type A Assassins in the semis and Moscow 5 played Frost, do you think that it would have been a CLG EU versus Moscow 5 final?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, obviously we spent a week with TPA, so we kind of knew each other like much better than any of the other teams in the tournament. So it would have been odd to like, because there's not really hiding much in season 2. We just kind of played what we think were the strongest. It was a lot of, when we practiced against them, it was a lot of the same champions being played into like same matchups all the time, same champions, and we just like practicing that because people play whatever they like to play at the time. So there wasn't a lot of variety. So we would all expect exactly, or we would all know exactly what would be coming at us if we matched up against each other. Honestly, I don't really know if that would be better or worse for us.
Because I'm curious, merely because you also knew Frost pretty well from just having played a best of 5 against them, and also you had kind of a lot of, I think, play style similarities in a way. Especially Snoop and Cloud Templar were pretty similar junglers for the time overall, and you both had I would say more supportive AD carries in Yellow Pete and Woong. So in a weird way, you guys were pretty good mirrors of each other, I think. Whereas the style of Type A Assassins was quite different.
I agree. Also, when I was in Korea, I actually played a lot of games with the Super Frost players. And I
actually played as the mid laner with him, right, in a couple of games, like some scrims, Matt.
No, I played ranked 5 with them, and I was supporting Mad Life in bot lane, and I remember.
So it was complete role swaps, right? Okay.
I mean, that's the funny part about later, because I was playing Blitzcrank with Mad Life, so I learned like some stuff from him. Playing support.
He told you some of the secrets for fucking Blitzcrank.
No, I mean, it's pretty logical what he's doing, you know, but I'm like, well, the pressure is on if I'm playing with Mad Life, you know, I got to do my best. So, I mean, chatting it out, you know, and seeing like how this champion works. So that was fun.
Sadly, modern fans will never be. That's one of those players that, like, if you weren't in that time period, it doesn't translate. Because if you watch now, like, everyone's seen a billion Thresh hooks and fucking Blitzcrank grabs. So now people are going to think, like, what's the big deal? But, like, this guy used to legit, in real pro matches, just do, like, blind fucking, like, Blitzcrank grabs, like, over, like, you know, like, where, like, a buff would be, and just get people. And just, like basically just create free kills out of nowhere as the position that has no gold, no items, and in theory is supposed to be a ward bot. Like, that guy was just a fucking alien. Like, sadly, people won't realize that, because obviously now they only know Faker and all the others, but that guy was fucking unreal.
Well, it was also the fact that a lot of the stuff that even, you know, plat players, gold players can do on Thresh right now, he was really inventing a lot of those Thresh combos that no one else had thought of. So the way he would like hit a blind hook, go over the wall with the hook, lantern,
yes, bring a teammate over the wall as well.
Bring
a
teammate over the wall and just like invade your jungle.
Everything.
Yeah, flay them. And it seems like really standard now, but at the time it was completely innovative. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. Nobody knew that you could make these you could be a playmaker on support in the way that Mad Life was, because everybody else is just kind of derping around on Soraka. Or, you're playing more passively or setting up traps with Nunu or something like that, right? You're not actively going into the enemy's jungle and trying to fuck them up.
Yeah, you weren't trying to actually do something proactive. You are just like, as you said, you're trying to keep your mid lane and AD alive, and that's kind of how your job is seen. And then you try to CC people. So him being able to do these kind of things definitely is brought a new perspective to how the game could be played, for sure.
So leaving Worlds behind and going over to what was in many ways, I think, kind of the redemption of Moscow 5 being the favorites of this tournament, because the next, I think, big event that they were participating in was only a couple months later in January of 2013, which was IEM Katowice, which they won. Right?
No, there was some tournaments between then. Like they went to that like Tales of the Lane where like the top 4 played online, and they lost to Cursey U, which was like the team with fucking the Extinct and a few people. And then there was also like that was the last one I think they played that year, and then they went to the Katowice next year. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Katowice one is this. By the time,
oh, by the way, one other thing to say: they also then became Gambit Gaming in 2013 because the other detail, which has nothing to do with the players, but it's just one of the maddest stories of all time, is the Moscow 5 guy who actually had like a top CS team as well. Literally, I mean, I don't even think I have to say allegedly. I think it was all on tape, but he got arrested by the FBI for like credit card fraud or something, and I think he even went to prison. I'm not sure on the last detail, but basically, like Moscow 5 just stopped existing, and then that's why a classic summoning insight moment is when we bring Edward on, and I say to Edward, "It doesn't make sense, Edward, because you remember in 2014 when there was that like LCS game for EU that had to be played in London. It was in I can't remember if it was London, but it was in the UK, and famously like Gambit had to like send 2 subs." And I said, it's weird, Edward, because if your company's registered in the UK as Gambit Gaming, like they should just be able to get you a visa, mate. And then famously he said, because he had a good sense of humor and timing, he just said, "Little English?" And then just didn't answer the question because here's the thing, to this day nobody fucking knows who Gambit Gaming is. It's just a fucking enigma. It's just a mystery, isn't it?
The hilarious thing about Gambit, guys, is they are a company that, as Thorin said, is registered in the United Kingdom, but no one knows who owns them.
No one to this day. And they used to have one sponsor, and it was fucking Pringles at a time when Pringles sponsored nobody. Like that's like if I just made up my sponsor, like I'm just sponsored by Domino's Pizza. Like, well, got some Domino's here. Like, dude, the whole thing is like some fucking alternate reality shit. Like, I don't know who owns that team. I still don't now. I want to know though. I still want to know.
You know what's funny is I've actually tried to figure it out, and obviously, they're not going to say it on the shows, but they won't even tell me privately who.
No, it's something super like dodgy. It's someone who's under like another name or something. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know though for sure.
Yeah. So we've asked Edward and other players on shows too, saying who owns Gambit. No one has ever stepped up. There's never been any rumors. It is by far one of the best kept secrets in esports as to who owns this team.
I think even Richard Lewis doesn't know. So enough said. Right there we go. Enough said.
No, the mystery of Gambit, but at this time, Gambit Gaming is created. Gambit Gaming acquires this roster as the Moscow 5 owner, I think, does actually go to jail. And they end up entering into this IEM Katowice tournament, which happens a few months after Worlds in 2012. So this is like the first really big international event after Worlds is what it is. And there are teams there, including both Azubu rosters, so Blaze and Frost.
Well, technically Gentis at the time, I think. But they were Azubu still.
Nope,
I think it was that was the last season they were Azubu. Yeah, true. They were both at the time. If people don't know, they were both in the semi-finals of OGM, but they hadn't actually, I think, played that semi-final that they had where it was the 2 best of 5. So at the time, they were considered like 2 of the absolute elite Korean teams.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this too was I'm trying to remember if Champions Winter had finished by
no,
this.
it hadn't. That's what I'm saying. They were in the semis at that point in time.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So yeah, it was.
So Sword hadn't won yet. We didn't know exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So Sword was actually the best team in Korea at the time, which we discovered later. But also could have been affected by the fact that these teams had to travel to Poland to compete in this.
Who knows, right?
But famously, what happens is that Gambit, even though they end up going 1-2 in the group stage, this is like a classic Gambit story, right? They do, and they lose their one game to Azubu.
Do you want the context? Here we go.
Yeah,
here's the quick version. It goes, I can do this all from memory. I don't give a fuck. You're at my level. Right, so here's what happened, right? Bizarrely, Curse NA, who went to this tournament, had a scenario where I think Nijaki like couldn't actually get a visa, and they had to use, I can't remember the guy's name actually, the guy who was, I think, their support player, Sub or something, as like the fucking, his name began with R, I believe. I had to play as the mid laner. So actually, this team should have never had any chance, right? But somehow they actually fucking beat Moscow Fight. Gambit Gaming, there you go, Rocks. Somehow they beat Gambit Gaming, right? And so Gambit Gaming gets in this bizarre scenario where in the last game, they not only have to win, but they have to win faster than the other team wins their game or something. And so they have to do this like speed run where they win it. And by the way, the other game they played in the group was, I think it was Blaze, not Floss they played. And basically, whichever one they played in the group, they got like beaten easily. But this is the key story. Supposedly, when they played the first game, it's the one time they ever actually tried copying the Koreans, Monty. They supposedly played like a Korean style comp. Because at the time, there were certain champions off the top of my head, I'm going to say like Caitlyn and something else that were like super OP in Korea as the comps. So they supposedly played like, you know, a real meta comp, lost completely. So then when they played the Korean teams in the semis and the final, basically the story is they just went like, fuck it, just play like the old champions that we used to be good on and just play whatever your best champion is and just do whatever you want. And then obviously just 2-0'd all these Korean teams and stomped them mega hard to the extent that like when I've done interviews with players since then, they all have like PTSD trauma from playing against this team. Like when I talked to Flame, he was even telling me like he didn't really understand if Darian was the best top laner. It's just that he build items that didn't make any sense. But because it didn't make any sense, the timing of when he would build it would mean he had a power spike that you didn't even know existed. And then he would lose and so you're like, so did I actually lose that, or is that an accident? Like, and they just couldn't handle it, Monty, because they were the ultimate team. Like, if people don't know, I've always tied this to the modern day. The thing about G2 that I think made them such Korean killers is because they had like a style that was adaptable, unpredictable. They do things that flout the meta. That's horrible for Koreans because what Koreans love is when the meta just is Korean play and everyone plays within their rules because then they've seen everything in practice. If you're a team that can throw just something crazy at them, you can rattle these guys. You really can.
Yeah, and by the way, Diamond Prox was just spamming Xin Zhao during this event, which was not a meta jungler at the time, but he would just run up to people. He was famous for doing this, by the way. He would go to these international events and he'd play Udyr or Xin Zhao, and then he would just duel the shit out of you, which was... Koreans really don't like to play that way, especially Frost, who Cloud Templar's just sitting there playing like Shen or a Mumu or whatever, Maokai, just trying to scale or help out his lanes and play very passively. And so he was definitely not used to Diamond Prox just being in his jungle trying to fight him constantly. And that was a pretty big part, I think, of the overall success that Gambit had in this tournament. Do you recall anything from this? Because it was a major moment where they 2-0'd both of the Korean teams.
Didn't Diamond Prox do something controversial after one of those wins?
He did this when he beat them in the final, I think, right? Because there was some story where apparently it was mistranslated. Like, you know, like Frost actually did like a very mild comment in an interview, like, you know, we will win or something. But someone like mistranslated it in the Russian as like something vaguely controversial. So when he won, he did the old classic international symbol that I hope everyone recognizes where you go up yours. Yep. And then, because he's actually, I mean, this actually isn't as cool. He then tried to claim like it was something else. Like, oh, I just put my arm up. Like, that's him. If you look on video, he literally just goes up to him like, I go up yours, because he just beat him, hasn't he? So, like, it was pretty gangster, I have to say. But Rob, listen, this is how you know it wasn't a Riot tournament. Like, he didn't get, like, banned for life from that one. Like, if that was I Will Dominate in, like, LCS, never play again, would he? Like, for the end of the fucking world. Remember when Hyde did that one, like cheeky little, and then he just got, like, fined and fucking wrecked for a game or something, back in the day.
Yeah, they fined him like little, 5 or 10K.
Yeah, it wasn't even like a good one. Just doing that. Yeah, I know.
It's all right. Jack paid for that. That's the thing, is that Jack does actually just not care, and he will pay for those fines himself when his players do that. And also, it's frankly just a slap on the wrist is good for the league, because the league can officially say, "Oh yeah, we definitely don't condone that." Wink, wink, right? Because they want the players to do that, and so they just give you a shitty fine that the org can pay super easily, and then everybody gets the drama, which they love, and the league could just say, "Well, we fined him, naughty, naughty." But that's basically what all tournament operators do. They won't actually punish you, and who knows? A lot of the times, they may not have actually issued that fine or really paid for it. Like, I never saw a receipt. Let's put it that way.
Also, the thing people won't understand as well, Monty, is like, you're already in Western esports. It'd be considered controversial if you did that. Like, I'll give you an example. Around a similar time, like a year before, there was a thing where a player from Na'Vi in CSGO actually literally in a final, like, turned to the other team on stage and give them like the middle finger, which was also like very shocking. But that's even with Westerners who do trash talk. You do with this two Koreans, which is like an honor-based society where like everything's about like politeness and formality. And you're just basically saying, not only have I just beat you in the video game that your whole life is about playing, but fuck you. Like, all right, mate. Listen, that's also where not only like team-wise, that's like Russians are now interacting with Koreans. Like, hello, let's just have this cultural fucking dialogue. Why don't we?
All right. So let's talk about the first season that you guys played in Europe, because this was the start of the EU LCS. So right after this big victory from the newly christened Gambit Gaming at Katowice, you go into the EU LCS 2013 spring season, which is taking place in Germany. It's in Cologne at the ESL studios. You guys have rebranded to Evil Geniuses. So because of the way that franchising, or not franchising, but Riot's rules ended up working, you actually could not have a CLG EU roster anymore. Isn't that correct?
I'm not 100% sure, because all I did was play League at the time, so I wasn't really interested in anything else.
To be fair, Monty, if CLG had two teams, well, the problem is the owner plays in the North American team, so it'd be pretty bold to cut his own self from the org.
I'm pretty sure some of the reason why we joined EG instead of CLG was money reasons, because
they were a very wealthy org at the time, for sure. Yeah,
but like we earned like $500 a month on CLG EU for like the first half of the year, and then like, oh shit, you guys won a lot of tournaments, here's $1,000 instead, and we're like, well shit, I mean, let's see what the options are, but I mean, I was playing League, so but I'm pretty sure that was some of the reason to joining EG instead.
Yep, sounds about right for the early days. And for those of you guys who are freaking out about those numbers, that was really it was pretty standard for League of Legends in the 2012 previous era. I mean, there just wasn't money.
At this period of time, even the best Counter-Strike team would get like $1,000 a month. That was pretty much the cap at the time. Now, it's true, in League of Legends you can make all that money from streaming, but in terms of orgs didn't pay mega bucks. That's why it's no surprise that EG would be the team they'd join, because this was when EG was like Alex Garfield EG, when they had all the StarCraft players, and they were famous basically for just buying anyone who wins tournaments and paying them a fuck ton of money, and then also saying stream 1 million hours. But that was like the EG way back then.
There also was a lot more tournaments, so you would earn your money from winning tournaments.
Yes. By the way, one detail we need to mention now, though, Monty, because unfortunately none of us knew this, sadly, except some of the players, until years later, which is when everyone judges Gambit when they're in the LCS, where like they're still a top team, like in the first split with the real team, like the second, and they almost win, and later on they're still always a playoff team. What everyone didn't fully understand who were fans is Gambit was a team that could only exist in the open circuit. Because in the open circuit, they would go home like you do in Counter-Strike now. You live in your home country, you live in your home if you want, have all your friends around, your family. Then when there's a tournament, you travel to the tournament and you play the tournament. So what they would do back then was they would just organize a big boot camp before any big tournament, like a week boot camp, practice, and then go to the tournament, right? When LCS came along, because they're mostly Russian nationals, it doesn't help Edward being Armenian in this sense either, they couldn't get visas to the EU, basically. Yep. So they had to almost like pretend they're tourists, come for however many days you're allowed to come to the EU on like a Schengen passport or whatever, visa or whatever, and then basically they only had so many days during a certain period they could stay in Germany. So they had to sort of like, I believe it was every week, travel back and forth. And so whereas every other team pretty much had a team house in Cologne and just lived there on site. And then, you know, it was not even that far to the actual office. Like Cologne's not a massive place. These guys legitimately were not only flying from Russia to Germany, but because they weren't in the best org and money wasn't as big back then, like Edwards was the maddest. He told me some shit. Like he used to take like fucking like 7 hours on a train and then take a flight.
Well, it's because
some ridiculous stuff like that, like every week.
It's because he was living, I think, in the far east.
He was in like Odessa or somewhere really bizarre.
Yeah, he was living in the far east of Russia at the time. So it was I think it was really, I recall him saying that it was a really bad travel schedule for them. And I also think that, if I recall correctly, I don't think they really got along in person for very long. Like things would start to get bad if they were together for too long. Like they could sustain kind of like, okay, we'll go to this event and practice boot camp and then practice. But that team, so in terms of a social dynamic, really did need breaks from each other. And I think that the structure of the EU LCS and the league style did not do great things for them, especially when you combine the stress of traveling with that. Did you have any sense of that, Froggen?
No, I mean, we were just mostly focused on ourselves. I mean, obviously, we do know that Gambit had to deal with all that travel stuff, and honestly, the sense of them not getting along kind of comes all the way back from season 2. I mean, it's not like they didn't really interact with each other. I mean, they didn't look like they had a lot of fun with each other. They just show up, they play their games, you know, and that's like, then they leave. Like you never really saw them do a whole lot of things. Like never really do any social things, anything like that. I mean, occasionally Alex would, I think, but the rest, I mean, we don't really know anything.
Yeah, back then, basically, Alex Ich was the only one that like spoke decent English, and then Edward would try, but the others were just a black box. Like Diamond Prox just basically spoke Russian, and Darian and Genja were like, no one even thought of them as like humans. They were just these alien creatures walking around like, oh, fucking hell, Darian or something. Like, no one's trying to talk to these guys. No one even knows what's going on in their minds. No one ever will. By the only player, Monty, that I never got in the collection was Darian. Because obviously, of all the people who, when they're retired, wouldn't give a fuck about doing an interview about League of Legends, he's the obvious one, and he's like, I don't give a fuck. Blaze it 420, motherfucker. Like, just out.
Those memes that ended up happening with him are so funny. So for those of you who don't know, as kind of the LCS progressed over the 2013 and 2014 seasons, which is when it was after 2014 that the Gambit kind of original roster ended up falling apart. Yes. So it wasn't, that was the end of this kind of period of dominance. But there was a time where Darian was basically he was forcing bans on top lane Warwick, and this was
he got Warwick banned. Yes, it wasn't a top lane champion. It was fucking like jungle. It wasn't champion at all.
This was before the rework, by the way. So original Warwick, which is a really shitty design, like really binary. He ended up getting the champion banned, so people started calling it Weedwick, and there would be these. There would be these videos,
and when they actually banned it, he was like, "Yes!" Like he's already won the game already, and like champ select or something like.
So there were people started making these meme videos of him doing that, and then like the smoke weed every day, and then like him like stumbling around on stage, like on these entrances, that were super funny at the time, and. I'm not sure why the weed thing started, just because probably he looked like he was high constantly, because he was just kind of
had a very weird style of play as well, though, didn't he? You know,
yeah. But just really funny shit that people started doing. So, but the point is that starting in the LCS, the shenanigans didn't stop. Like at no point in time, like you could have said previously when there was the tournament circuit, okay, Gambit or Moscow 5, they're playing weird because they're isolated from the other teams. They're not really able to adhere to this meta because they're kind of the mad scientist in their black box doing their experiments. But even when they started getting into the actual league play and exposed to teams on a weekly basis, they continued to do all of the weird shit that they had always done. So the style never really changed very much. And for the most part, they continued to be pretty successful with it, as we were talking about in the spring season, which they took second place in the regular season, and then ended up in the finals against the #1 team and barely losing to Fnatic there. Meanwhile, you on EG were in third place. Do you remember a lot about that first season of EU LCS, Froggen?
I think it was the first season is why EU is known for tiebreakers, isn't it? That was
that was summer.
Oh,
Yeah, but that was the summer one where you all had the five. It was like a 5 or 6 team tie for second place. Yeah, something like that, right?
Yeah, there was, I don't know, there was like 7 ties total, 5 teams tied, and then another tiebreaker between some other 2 teams.
I remember it was something mad, like there was, because remember there's only 8 teams in the league. I remember it was something mad, like one of the teams in the tiebreak, like I think like SK Gaming or something, because they did the worst, they then were in relegations, because that's how mad like LCS was back then, that you could go from a tie for second to you just play a game, are you even in the league anymore? Because it was a wild circuit back then. Let's just say that.
It was. I mean, I don't remember many things from the spring season. I just remember all the tiebreakers, and then we had tiebreaker against them, and where I played Blitzcrank and Crapper played Anivia.
Troll game. Yeah.
Okay. So let's,
because by the way, people don't know, because Crepo was always a troll. He used to also joke that, like, I'm a pretty good Anivia as well in the team. Like, even though he was like the best in the world or whatever.
He used to be a mid lane main. Crepo used to be a mid lane main, and he swapped to support when he. I don't remember if it was before he joined CLG or not, but he used to play a lot of Anivia too. So I mean, honestly, everybody except for Crepo wanted to do this. But also, what's to understand is there was like, I mean, it was the very last tiebreaker of the day, and it was like 3 or 4 a.m. in the night because in EU we start playing in the evening. So we started at 6 p.m. and
it
then
was the
last
6th
game was
tiebreaker.
Yeah, and it was at 4 a.m. Like nobody cared if you won or lost. Like we just wanted to get this shit over with, so we wanted to have some fun with it. So we were in the room preparing, and we were like, "Yo, guys, let's swap off some fucking roles. This is gonna be great." And then we ended up with me playing Blitzcrank and him playing Anivia.
So all the Mad Life tips that you talked about earlier ended up actually coming into play a year later.
Exactly.
So to describe this, so it was a tiebreaker overall for second place that Fnatic actually ended up winning. But you ended up taking the second place. So you were seated above, Evil Geniuses was seated above Gambit. You actually beat Gambit in 2 games in tiebreakers that same day. So you beat them once, then you beat them again. So you just decided, you intentionally did this then with Crepo on the Anivia and mid lane, because it was a pretty convincing win. I took a look at that game again.
Yeah, but I mean, we won pretty easily, but I also think if you look at how Moscow 5 played, they were not in the mood to, or Gambit, they were not in the mood to play against the Blitzcrank for sure. I mean, they were literally running it down. Let's just go fight. Like, who the fuck cares? And we had the same attitude. Where it's like, well, if we lost, I think we would end up having to play like Nip instead of playing whoever we played, or other way around, something like that. And ultimately, I mean, all the teams were tired, so we were kind of like, who really cares? I mean, we just want to get this day over with. So, I mean, we try our best playing the game, but ultimately it doesn't matter too much if we won or lost that game. And I'm pretty sure they felt the same way. They at least looked that way.
So let's talk about the summer playoffs then, because this is the match that ended up deciding that you guys didn't go to Worlds, right? This was a 3rd place match. So what ended up happening is EG, you guys lose to Fnatic in the semis, Gambit loses to Lemon Dogs. So you have a 3rd place match that you have to play, and the winner of this goes to the World Championship in season 3, and they beat you 2-1. So what do you recall from that series and how it was playing against them?
I mean, I remember we had a pretty tough time playing against them, even though it was like fairly close games. And I don't particularly well remember the first 2 games well, but I remember the 3rd game pretty well. I was playing TF, but I don't know, it's just a whole lot of sadness when I think about it, because it's like the first game where we don't qualify to or go to a very big tournament as CLGU/EG. So that was really like damning on me for sure. And I don't know. I just that was like when I was just going through a lot of emotions, considering a lot of things, because throughout that that season, I think that was also the start of where we started to role swap. where we ended up having Shaka instead of Snooper for some of the games. So we already thought a bit about like, okay, like some things are not working in our team and we need to like change things up because some people are not practicing as much as others, and like we just couldn't keep up with other teams and we started losing a lot of scrims. So that was when it first started happening, me at least, with okay, something needs to change here. And then obviously Gambit was just super, super happy about this whole scenario because they ended up going to Worlds. But I remember they also weren't very happy with their team.
Well, this is the season where Edward was no longer on the roster, and they replaced him with Voidal at support.
And then a guy called Darker before that, but yeah, both of them, yeah, they're 2 players.
Yeah, and I remember after the finals, that was when the whole start to create a new team for the next season started happening, and that was actually
the Froggen super team process.
The funny thing though is that it was actually Alex Itch that started this whole idea because he was the one that talked to me about it initially.
Wasn't he going to play like top lane or something ridiculous?
Yeah,
and role swap.
He was gonna play top lane, but Worlds were, I mean, dude, they're just beaten us in this. They're going to Worlds, and he's like, "Yo, let's create a fucking team." I'll play.
It's basically like what Caps and fucking Perks did. Like Perks was like, "Look, Caps, come and play my role, and I'll role swap." It's the same shit.
Yeah. But they weren't doing well either, so that was the start of the breakup for them for sure.
That was also the period, by the way, because it goes with what Monty was saying about the fact that they never really got along very well as players. Like, basically in this team, it was like Froggen said, it wasn't even like they didn't just get along. Some of them just never talk. They were just like, right, we play the game like pros, and then aside from that, like maybe like I think it was like Darian's friends with Diamond Prox, but then like fucking Alex Itch doesn't talk to this guy, and then Edward hates Diamond Prox. They had all these weird fractious elements, and as I'm sure people can guess from being in a brand new org and being in a dodgy org before, they weren't getting paid massive amount of money. So I know this is also the period when Alex Itch cleverly, because he was the face of the team and still considered a very good player, started figuring out, is there any way I can get one of those European or American visas that let me leave this fucking train wreck? And even though he didn't do it quite yet, he was already, the idea had started and all that. And obviously, as Monty says, eventually he managed to do it to work for Riot many years later, and obviously the Renegades period. But I know he already wanted to like go elsewhere, basically. Like the team, that was one of the interesting things about the team, if people don't know, is they weren't a team who, another thing they didn't understand is they didn't know that it was actually that 5 exact players and the bizarre interaction in game that made them so good. So they did let Edward go and they did bring in these other players. And basically their manager at the time, a guy called Groove, was a former Counter-Strike player for, actually, funnily enough, a team called Virtus Pro many years ago in Counter-Strike, right? And because in his team in Counter-Strike, they used to notoriously, every time they did bad at a tournament, like kick a player, even if it meant 6 months later, by rotation of how many people are in the scene, you end up recruiting him back and being good. He basically learned when you have a good team, you don't fuck with it until you know it can't win anymore. So he sort of told these guys that you got to get the team back together. You got to bring Edward back in. You got to bring the squad together, because they were a team where like when they actually had Edward in the lineup, there was some stat where, aside from the last ever tournament, which was the spring season of season 4, every other tournament they ever played on LAN, I think it was something like 16 LANs, they were at least top 4 in the tournament. Like it was absurd, like how consistent this team was. Like they basically almost never had a bad tournament together.
Another fun stat from Gambit or Moscow 5 is that they have never lost a finals except for 2CLG EU. They've only ever lost us in a finals.
Okay, there you go.
I didn't know that, but that is a very cool stat, and I think a real testament to your rivalry too, because we've covered a lot of ground here, but this is already basically 2 years after we started this conversation. And so it really goes to show you how many times you guys played against each other in really important matches, because we're talking about the Worlds qualifier right here. There were instances of getting to these major events, or literally being in the finals of these major events, potentially being 2 of the top teams and favorites of the entire season 2 World Championship. So this was really like the most exciting match in Europe for years. And a lot of fans will equate that to Fnatic versus G2. But the difference between those, you guys, is that this matchup actually went back and forth for the most part, right? The last few years of G2 versus Fnatic has just been G2 winning. So even though people like to say it's a rivalry, it really has been rather one-sided. Whereas the CLGU Gambit one, you never knew what the outcome was going to be, and you guys kind of passed the crown back and forth between each other, which made it really fun.
Yeah. I mean, I actually don't even know our exact score against them, but I do think it's very, very even.
I imagine it was very close. And, it's a bummer that both of you guys couldn't go to this world championship, because this was another instance of Gambit really performing extremely well at an international event.
If anything,
way overperforming, because remember that they were in a group with Samsung Ozone. And this is where the Dade award comes from,
yes.
which is that Dade was a complete trash can at this tournament after being, everybody expected him to do very well. And Samsung Ozone actually loses a tiebreaker to not make it out of groups to Gambit, which was really shocking.
And that was where Time Lord Genji was running the fucking Cogmore, baby. The Trinity Force Cogmore.
Which was terrible.
Which was terrible. By the way,
was terrible.
I like the meme. It's a funny meme. But let's be real, right? Genji was like almost objectively wrong in a load of those builds. It's just that later when the game changed, they were viable. Like, it wasn't.
What was so annoying?
That was just a meme that he was a Time Lord, guys. He's just a weird guy, that's all.
I got so triggered by that because I kept saying at this event that Trinity Force Kog'Maw was just bad. And people then later, after Trinity Force and Kog'Maw got changed and it was good, like a year later, people were like, Monty, see, everyone's doing it. And I'm like, yes, because they fucking changed everything, not because it was good at the time, which it was not. It was trash. But it really helped that Dade was just completely throwing games on Gragas during this tournament for whatever reason. And so also you have to remember too, that the top 4 teams at Worlds at that point in time did not actually get put in the group stages. They got seeded directly into the quarterfinals. So there were only 4 teams exiting the actual group stage. And that meant that it was 2 groups of 5 teams, so that 3 teams from each group got eliminated. And it ended up being Samsung Ozone, which is one of the, I think, biggest flops in world history, given their overall strength coming in. And the fact that a year later they would win Worlds, basically with almost the same roster.
By the way, that story though of the Kog'Maw is another just way of summarizing what Moscow 5 was about. Like, they could actually pick something that objectively was worse, but because you've never played against it, somehow win with it. Like, I don't know if people remember this, but another mad one that is, I remember when Genja on Varus used to build like 3rd or 4th item a fucking Stinger. And at the time, everyone was like, that vaguely makes sense because you have like more like attack speed, like if you could get like the full build again. But like this guy was just doing it like when he's behind in the game and stuff. Is he ever going to complete the items? Like, he was a fucking weird guy. That's all I'm going to say. He was a weird guy. Even in this tournament though, like you're saying, Monty, when they get out of the group as well, then they play Naj and Sword, who were like no one knew anything about, and they still almost beat them even without Edward.
And they were the number 1 seed from Korea at the time.
Due to the circuit point system,
Due to the circuit point system, even though SK Telecom was the best team in Korea, by the time World started, they had just won the summer final versus KT, the famous Z versus Z play, and the Gauntlet, because they were a rising team, and Naj and Sword had done better over a longer period of time.
SKT didn't play Winter.
Yeah, they didn't play one of the tournaments, so Naj and Sword won Winter and ended up with a bunch of points as a result of that. They were not, in fact, so they were not as good of a team as SKT, so I think the result was less shocking. But this was also when quarterfinals were best of 3s for some reason, which changed in 2014. But I'm based on your experience, Froggen, I'm curious about this, because even in EU LCS, only the finals were best of 5. So it was like season 2 Worlds, only the finals were best of 5. Only the finals were best of 5 in LCS. Only the semis onward at 2013 were best of 5s, I believe. But what was your opinion on best of 3 versus best of 5 as a format choice when these tournaments were running?
I don't think it was too bad at the time, because we had a shit ton of regular season games. So we actually got like a ton of practice. I think we played every team like 4 times, if I remember correctly. And then we have like super weeks and stuff, where it's like we play 4 times a week. So we would have a lot of like games that would be played. At least compared to now, where we have like 18 games being played, we played way more than like 40 games at least, So that kind of makes up for it. Now you barely play games. So best of 5 makes a lot more sense in that matter. So I think it's more like probably time issue thing to not have best of 5s instead of best of 3s, and then just for the timing of where things were at in esports and everything. It's like 5 games was probably way too long when the games being played around the time was also like 40, 50 minutes long. Like it would take half the day to finish like one best of 5, so it would be too much, you know. I think it makes a lot more sense in current date and time that it's best of 5s instead of best of 3s.
What do you recall, Thorin, from Gambit's performance at that tournament? Because I remember the group stage very clearly, but it was just another one of those moments, especially because when they played Najin really closely, and then Najin played SKT to a 3-2 loss, that it again seemed like all of a sudden this team who was not topping Europe, but as soon as you toss them into an international event, is potentially a dark horse to win the whole thing, especially given the results that they ended up having.
The key thing is, like, again, I'll reference back to the fact that this was when they didn't have Edward. So they had, in theory, like a slightly weaker version of their roster. So as you say, when you look at the group they were in, right, the champions of Europe were Fnatic, and they actually did amazingly in this group. And then the other team on paper it should have been the Samsung Ozone team. So on paper, they had no business even getting out the groups. Then, when they're in the quarterfinals, one of the whole reasons why a lot of people think SK Telecom, who seemed unbeatable at the time, had that insane 5-game series against Najin Sword, is because Najin Sword, because they literally got to just go straight to the tournament without having to play the gauntlet and without being a relevant team in Korea at the time, and even had like Nagni as like a mid lane sub or whatever who was being played. They would literally a complete black box, and they brought the sister team Shield to the event, and they only practiced each other, and nobody else got to. It was old school Korean style where the sister teams like protect one of the teams basically. And so as a result, even SKT probably didn't know how this team was going to play until this series. And I remember in this series, there's another example of like the idea Gambit even wins a game on paper should never happen. Like to even make the playoffs is pretty good there. So the thing about the Gambit team was they also, another factor you have to mention is they were just a clutch team. Like it's not about whether all their players were the best or whatever, but if you put them in a scenario where there's a chance to win, they'll find it a lot of the times, even if they're doing all this weird meta shit elsewhere.
So they end up doing very well, and this is kind of the end of the classic Gambit success story, right? The rivalry died at the end of 2013 because several of your teammates like Crepo and Yellow Pete and Stupe ended up going to EG in North America. You ended up going with Wicked to Alliance and staying in Europe. So you continue to play against Gambit, and even though Edward came back to the roster, I believe, at the start of 2014. Yes.
No, he came back after Worlds. Actually, they played like IEM Cologne and they smashed the tournament. Like, yeah, he was back after that.
So they ended up getting the team back together, but it was never actually the same from that point forward. You on Alliance did much better than they did, especially they ended up in relegations. Actually, they didn't get relegated, but they ended up they ended up in relegations at the end of summer. So over the course of 2014 and after their really big Worlds peak, what do you think changed, or why do you think Gambit started to decline, Froggen?
I think at some point, everything just kind of catches up to you when you think about they have this crazy schedule of, well, every single week they're traveling like many, many hours even to just get to Europe. They can't practice properly. They play less solo queue than everybody else. They just overall get less practice, and they already don't like each other. So once you start losing, it happens fast. Like it's gonna keep snowballing. If you don't like each other and you start losing, you're never gonna get back up. You know, like it's gonna be like, well, we lose because of you or because of you, and then they start hating each other, and it just like disassembles itself, kind of situation. So it's just doomed once it starts happening.
Yeah, if you're going to break the team up potentially when you win it, fucking hell, what you're going to do when you lose it? It makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly.
I'm just surprised because you would not have expected these kind of results or this kind of effect based off of what was a pretty successful first EU LCS season, and then rolling into a top 8 performance at Worlds and overperforming, seemingly getting better. It's unusual that you would have this kind of collapse immediately afterwards.
Yeah, but I mean, a similar thing happened in EG, at least, where it's like we're changing out Snoopy for the other guy, where it's like, well, it's like we're doing all right. It's not like the world is falling apart. We're still up there, but if you want to like be the best and you can clearly see something is not working, or like it's not working from scrims and you're just gradually getting worse and worse and worse, it's like maybe from an outside point where you don't experience all these things, it does not make sense to just break everything up. But it's like if you're living in that stuff, it makes complete sense to do it.
I think also, I actually think Alex Itch told me this one time, that at the time as well, another reason why the team had a lot of internal issues is some of them just didn't play solo queue, basically. So I think it was like Darian almost never played, and I think Genja only played and did like the weird shit. Like I think, like just like he was later, I think Genja was like a diamond player who just played like the same champion every game or something. So like if you're Alex Itch and you're like, we got to practice to get back to the top, it's going to piss you off if like two of your teammates basically don't practice like pros. Because again, this is part of the issue. You're coming from the open circuit, which is old school esports, where you're just a guy who lives at home and goes to some tournaments, to now you're supposed to live in an area and be a total pro and everything's about the game. So some people just aren't cut out for that life. Like, some people want it to be fun, not work.
Yeah, but that's also, I think personally that's probably the biggest difference between like a winning team and just like an okay team or a losing team is like, well, if you want to win, all 5 players have to like constantly grind for it, and like everyone that's around your team has to constantly grind for it, and eventually like you become good through that grind, but you have to like really do it. It's not just gonna be, okay, I did like my normal work and now that's it. Hopefully my teammates did that too and then we're better tomorrow kind of thing. It's kind of like, well, your life is literally this one thing and this one thing only. And if that's what you're doing, you might like, maybe it doesn't work, but there's a chance it might. Like that's when you get your chance. So if you don't actually put in all that effort, it's never going to work out.
I just find them so interesting because they're a team that was so unique. And we've talked about this a lot as having this being much more than the sum of their parts, in the same way that G2 was for a number of years. And you remove one of those parts and then suddenly they seem like much more of a normal team, which is how G2 feels now after Perks left. And even though stylistically they're pretty different, it is still fun. Like at least with CLGU and EG, when you guys were competing against them, your team made sense, right? You had you were playing much more standard. You had your own style for sure. I look, compared to that.
I don't think so. I think I played crazier than them.
Sure. But I'm just saying overall, I think that as a team, you guys had a much more discernible style, and it made sense what was going on given your player strengths. What was always weird about Gambit is that you just didn't know what was going to happen in these games and how they were going to just it didn't seem to make sense, the decisions that the players were making together, whereas it did have a logical progression of thought with you guys, right?
Sure.
You could understand why you were making these decisions, where at times it was just completely, you would never understand why Gambit or Moscow 5 were making the decisions they were making. And then on top of that, why they were winning games by making these decisions was fun to watch, but also very confusing. And I wonder if it really seems like that was only possible when the scene wasn't as integrated, when it was like a disparate tournament circuit where there wasn't as much kind of day in, day out play or refining a meta. It was kind of the Wild West, and they were a huge beneficiary of that as a team that just couldn't keep up as the game knowledge advanced across the board.
I'll even give you an analogy, Monty. It's basically what happened in StarCraft Brood War. So there's a very famous piece of trivia that the only time, until actually like 2 years ago, a foreign StarCraft player came to Korea and won the biggest tournament, was at the very beginning of StarCraft Brood War, the first OGN, the first official one. And basically it's because at the time, I believe they didn't even have replays back then. At the time, if you were some guy, so this Canadian guy was like a sort of savant in his own way, if you just had innovation, if that was just your main strength, it was the most OP shit, because the other guy doesn't know what strategy you're going to pull. He's never seen it before, and there's no replay to study and see you build and stuff. So he basically has to play you until he figures out how to beat you in the games he's playing you. So similarly, for me, I agree. Like Moscow 5 had to exist in this period where it's like an open circuit, like everyone doesn't practice and scrim every single week. Like you mainly play.
There's no infrastructure.
Matches. Yeah. Koreans aren't just studying everything you're doing 24/7. Like it makes sense that they were like, that was the period they were around,
Yeah, and there was no real way to, you could do it via the eye test, but it was a lot harder to kind of judge relative strength during this period, because it was hard to watch OGN from the West at first, at the beginning. It wasn't, YouTube was not huge at this time. There were competing streaming services. Streaming was kind of low quality. A lot of the stuff was paywalled. A lot of these matches are lost right now. And the only way that you could even see, get a sense of the interregionality were teams like you going to OGN and CLG and Dignitas and these teams going before you did. and then the occasional Korean team showing up in the West. But it was the same thing with Moscow 5, where they just kind of came out of nowhere as Team Empire and then ended up qualifying for major tournaments and then winning them immediately. So it was really shocking that they could just sneak up. I mean, they were no-namers, and then all of a sudden they were winning IEM Kiev, right? Out of an open qualifier, basically. It's one of the coolest, I think, stories in League of Legends esports history.
I'll also throw in, because one thing we haven't really mentioned as well is another stylistic strength this team had was they just actually like totally believed in the concept of team fighting. As in, you know, all those memes people make about MLXG on Reddit, where it's like when MLXG thinks he has a slight advantage, he goes for the gank because this is the correct play. But, you know, when he is actually a slight disadvantage, he sets up a gank because this is the correct time for a gank. And then when he's very much behind, he must go for a gank to get back in the game. Like that was like what they did with team fighting. It's like the flow chart just said, whatever happens, like it always just ended with have a team fight. So they were actually one of the best teams. Another area that reminded me of G2 is, you know, I always said, Monty, the thing I could never understand about Koreans playing League of Legends is when they would almost have like a gentleman's agreement in the team fight, like, that first guy died, we maybe wouldn't win, so just back off and let him die. And I was like, what is that? Why would you play like that? Like, sometimes you have to gamble it, but they would never do it. Moscow 5 was the opposite. Like, every time there's a team fight, they're just going to keep team fighting until they win the game. And they all lose the game, obviously. One of the two.
Do you think you had a special advantage against them, Froggen, because of your history? Like, it just seems that the more you're exposed to their play style, the less effective it becomes over time, which made them much more dangerous at these international events, even pretty late into their run, as opposed to, because you guys typically had their number way better than most other teams.
I think we were just really good at team fighting as well, and we tried to pick champions that like make sense with each other, and we know like how to play it out. So we just play a lot of the same stuff all the time, which actually works incredibly well against them. And then the whole notion where, well, we stall for late game and then we can always come back and win. I think we won a lot of games that we should have lost because people are like, oh no, we're gonna lose against these guys. They are like known for this. We can't do this. We can't do that because of this. So we probably won a lot of games just because people are scared that we might do something, where it's like we're just completely fucked, but we might do something. Kind of like the same thing with Moscow 5. With, oh no, they're gonna do something. They always do something weird. Like teams are like extra cautious instead of just taking it as like, okay, they're just playing the game just like we are. Just relax and let's have some fun. But yeah, we always ended up team fighting a lot against them, and split pushing was the thing at the time.
Yes, of course. That was like season 3, mainly. I've got a quick question for you, because I'm sure you told this story actually a long time ago on some Insight episode, but very few people are going to go back and watch. Like, when you say that you were also really good at team fighting, this was actually also the weird era, right? Where that wasn't actually the main strength of Koreans, mainly. Actually, there wasn't that many Korean teams that were that good. It was mainly just the Azubu teams were like the very good team fighting teams. Because I remember you told some mad story on Summoning Insight. Like, to you, it seemed like they didn't know how to play the game, because it was like, well, we just wait until their ults are down and then we team fight them. And then they're just like, you know, like agreeing to the team fight with no ults or whatever. Wasn't it something ridiculous like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like it will definitely like just not really prepare team fights well, in the sense where it's like you can like bait them into doing something pretty easily. Like obviously the good Korean teams are kind of like they would team fight back, and same thing with W, they would team fight back. But like the bad or mediocre Korean teams, they would kind of just play solo queue, and if they see a guy, they will like start fighting them no matter what. And it's, a lot of the time they just end up having one guy die, and then we team fight, or they will like use literally every single ultimate just to kill one dude, and then we team fight anyway because they used everything. So I think they just weren't that like they weren't that experienced with team game in League of Legends yet at the time we played the Korean teams. But like, I mean, the change to that is that Super Frost is kind of team fighting team, so they were showing everybody how to team fight.
Yeah, I think stylistically they were the most focused team on. If you compare the other names, the big names at the time, which were Najin Sword and Blaze, they were much more team fight focused than the other major powerful Korean rosters in that era, for sure. And then eventually that ended up becoming more of the dominant Korean style overall. So. Any final thoughts here on Gambit as we review their history? I think that basically wraps up the timeline.
I mean, one thing I'll say is, one thing I always thought was tragic was not just the travel situation, but the fact that basically, if people aren't aware, even though Gambit, the team, remained for years later, and they even had all those, like, they had Forgiven play for them, if people forget, and Kabashard, and a bunch of players came through later who weren't the Russians, they never were able to obviously remain in EU LCS. Like, they became a team in like the LCL or whatever the Russian league's called. I always thought that was a shame, because part of it, as far as I know, is like relations between Germany and Russia, and you can't get the visas or whatever. But I always thought that was really sad, because if people don't know, in the later days, people like Edward and Diamondprox still wanted to play in EU LCS. Like, if they could have, they would have been on teams. They were, until the ruling changed, because unfortunately Germany changed the rules to some mad shit, like that you couldn't have the visa unless you made over a certain amount of salary per year. And unfortunately, back then, almost no one made very much, and they definitely didn't have, like, I think it was like you had to have like 40,000 a year or something salary. So no one was making that in EU LCS back then, sadly. So they just could never be part of EU LCS again. So to me, I understand why they're leaving League of Legends now. They've sort of been less and less and less relevant over the years. But I always thought, in an ideal world, business things aside, I would have hoped they would have got to franchising and being like a permanent part of the history of the game, in the same way as in sports leagues. Whether a team's good or not, you still want the Knicks to be in basketball, like they have such a storied history. You don't want brand new teams all the time.
No, you don't. And, at least we got to see some of the other players continue on past that point. Like, we did see Edward sticking around. We saw Diamondprox going to Unicorns of Love eventually. Alex Ich was obviously in North America on a variety of teams, including, Renegades. And now Alex works full time as a coder, a computer engineer, I think, at Riot.
And he designed
right
Yumi,
now.
didn't he? That's a joke. He definitely didn't. No one take that clip. That's not real. That's a joke. Nobody deserves that reputation without having done that.
He's not a designer. I know he went to college for computer programming, so I think he's an engineer over there. He was working for some other companies here in Southern California after he stopped playing professionally. And Edward right now is the coach of Furia in the Brazilian league for League of Legends. So a lot of these guys have kind of kept up with a bunch of the other, opportunities that are within the space. I have no idea what happened to Genja and Darien. Absolutely no clue.
I think they just went back to their life. I mean, they look like the kind of guys that they just do whatever. Maybe they play solo queue still. Who knows?
I have no idea.
As far as I know, Darien did just completely fuck off. But it's like you referred to earlier. Genja did, just years after he was even a pro player, Monty, play basically just solo queue. Like I say, not even close to Clancha. I believe he was like a fucking put it this way, someone I know who played League of Legends, who's just an amateur, played solo queue games with Genja. Like, that's the level he was at. Like, he wasn't pro anymore. And part of it was, as you said, he just played Corky, Randy and Zorman every game. I think the guy played like 700 games in a row or something. And this is what's troll. You're all thinking, what's wrong with that? It's a good champion. Every game, as in if he was jungle, he would play Corky, fucking Randy and Zorman. Like, dude, imagine being paired with this guy in solo queue. And his name was Genja 007. Like, it's not even like he was smurfing, like he was that. He just knew. So this is a guy who was once like in one of the best teams in the world, and this cocksucker's playing fucking Corky jungle. And we're going to lose this game now. Or after Dodge back in the day, where you lose all the LP sound. Just terror. That's, in some ways, that's even better, Monty, because it's like as a ghost, he just kept walking the halls of EU West, haunting fucking future generations with his madness.
You weren't around when I was dominant, but you will be reminded of it constantly within your solo queue games. That's fantastic. That's great. Well, I think this has been a fun episode, guys. Don't need to make this super long. We're going to get to some questions for our Grog coin holders in a minute, but beforehand, Froggen, I know you've been streaming a ton recently. How are things going for you? Where can people find you on your glorious stream?
Yeah, they can find me on twitch.tv/Froggen, and the same thing on Twitter, just /Froggen.
Don't worry, he still plays all the same boring ass Froggen champions. Anivia, Lox, fucking Corky, and he still plays like it's LCS. Like, if the team fight's probably going to be lost, he does his damage, he backs the fuck out there, goes back to the lane. Don't worry, it's the classic Froggen. He's brought it back on stream, boys. He's back.
The weirdest thing is, the top 3 questions is, why do you always play Anivia? Or why do you never play Anivia? And then do you still talk to the guys from CLG EU?
Right, there you go.
Every 5 minutes.
I know. We can never escape our past, can we?
No, we cannot.
Yes, exactly.
It's I have the same experience, Froggen. You blow a train whistle one time, and then no one ever forgets it for some fucking reason.
Yeah, my biggest regret is playing Lux. Because literally nobody else plays this champion. I actually have it banned in my chat. Like, you can't write Lux. It's
Fair enough. All right. Well, you stream like every day, right?
Yeah, pretty much every day.
I see you on all the time. All the time.
I mean, right now it's every day, but I mean, it might change in the future. Who knows?
All right. Well, thank you, Froggen. Good luck with your streaming. Go watch Froggen stream. We're going to take a quick break, guys. When we come back, we're going to do some viewer Q&A from the Grog coin holders on the Insight on Esports Discord. So stay tuned. Now is the time where we answer your questions in the Grog coin chat, if you are in fact a Grog coin holder. And our first question from Karak, which is the question of who is the GOAT player in many games, comes up a lot. And one factor of the discussion that I think has been diluted by the lack of tournaments in favor of the league system is the ability to talk about the absolute peak of a player, since it's harder for one point to stick out as the pinnacle of a player's individual skill. That's a good point. What are some contenders for the highest peak of a player relatives to their time for a discussion like this? I've always been a jungle main / fan, so I think of Dandy's Season 4 Worlds performance as perfection. Yeah, I think Dandy's a player who really peaked very hard at Worlds. Like, he was always good, but he fell off really fast after that as well. And even though Mata ended up winning the MVP, I actually voted for Dandy when I was on the broadcast.
It was debatable, though. Like, to be fair, it was between
it wasn't like he was robbed or anything, and especially because the play style of Samsung White was so about their synergy. It was really hard to kind of divorce one from the other. But I did think that he, in particular, peaked very, very hard at the Season 4 World Championship. Another
I actually had an article on that, by the way. I did an article where I analyzed the champions he played at this exact tournament, because here's what's insane, Monty. That was the tournament, if you remember, where especially like NA players, that was when they used to have to try and play Rengar, because there was only so many champions. Like, at the time, it was like Lee Sin, Elise, there wasn't many champions that people played. And so famously, right, famously Insect like got through the tournament, was having to pull out like fiddlesticks and shit because people didn't have big champions. So this guy had the whole champion pool and played all the sides of the matchups and won them all. So like, he would play you like Lee Sin into Elise or whatever, and then he would just beat you with Elise and Elise. Like that's why to me he was the MVP, mate. It's like he was this high above everyone else in the jungle gap. He was smurfing.
Yeah, I agree. But unfortunately, I was but one vote among many. But I think in terms of other peaks, let's go back to the premise of the question, which is that the tournaments instead of the league system makes it hard to judge the peak of the player. I do think that's true. Because even if you peak at the wrong time, at like the beginning of a season, nobody ever remembers.
Spring is the classic one, as Dade's career shows us, right? The problem is, it's like I always said to you, mate, the problem with League of Legends is they changed the game. So if you're the best in the world in spring, like, good luck. You just don't get to win Worlds, probably, in most cases, Just the way the game goes, isn't it?
Because your shit's going to be nerfed because you're showing how powerful it is, which is a problem because the devs are paying attention to that. I think other players that have hit pretty insane peaks have been like Uzi at Season 4 Worlds is actually probably another pretty good example. The amount that he hard carried that team to the final is pretty fucking ridiculous.
Like, they had, on paper, they had no business even winning the quarterfinal against EDG. Like, EDG was the team in China. Like, they just fucking beat everyone. So yeah, I agree, mate. Like, that was a tournament where if people go back, that's the one where like you almost want to do like YouTube like 0.1 or whatever the slowest setting is in the team fights, because this motherfucker is like literally like, fucking like cancel and auto dodge the other thing, like fucking cleanse. Like, he's doing like all the fucking Neo in the Matrix shit stuff that you all wish you could do in games, and he's doing it on the biggest stage. It was impossible the level he was at. Yeah, it was bonkers. And he was still, I think he would have been like 16 or something at the time. He was very young, obviously. Go on then, chuck a few more, and then I'll do some based on you don't pay.
So to go back to the tournament thing, it was a lot easier to determine these player peaks when we had champions in Korea in a tournament format where we had 3 of these a year. Mad Life is a really good example of this, where when he was starting to dominate towards the end of 2012 and early 2013, prior to Faker, I think
when
you could say
Thresh, basically, right?
Yeah, so when they launched Thresh and he was playing like Thresh, Alistair, Blitzcrank, and just playmaking on these champions, I think he was probably the best player in the world at the time. Unfortunately, he got overshadowed by Faker pretty quickly. starting in spring.
And he had Woong and then Spaces as AD carries. That didn't help. That didn't help. Yeah.
By the way, Space Prison is still one of the best jokes of League of Legends history.
Yes. Because the other thing as well about Mad Life I'll throw in there as well is not only was he doing all this insane mechanical shit and essentially winning tournaments with a fucking guy who had no business, was a role swap top laner to ADC, but he also, as we mentioned on the last episode, he was doing what Doinby does now and what I still don't understand why a lot of players don't do, which is he would write the timers in the chat in pro games. Like he would just be playing and he wouldn't just time the ultimates, he would time your flash in lane and stuff. That's why there's that legendary story I referenced about Edward where it's like, why don't you time the flash, Edward? It's like, because I just killed them. It's like, all right, again, we're seeing the cultural, mismatch here. Okay, fair enough, Edward. You win on that one, I guess. Who else would you go with then? So we've done what was
Dandy.
The first one? Dandy.
Mad Life.
Uzi. Faker's going to be in there. Uzi. Which Faker season would you pick for this one, you think?
Maybe 2015 Worlds.
The summer
actually.
one where he banged on him. Oh,
because,
Worlds?
Well, even summer, like 2015 in general, like towards the middle and end of 2015, because you have to remember that Korea was not great in 2015 as a region, especially in the spring.
Because of the talent drain to LPL, yeah, of course.
One of the things that really pisses me off is that people think that Marin was one of the great all-time top laners when he basically got away with having an extremely dominant Maokai, and he was good at certain picks, but he was never a star top laner in the way that people like Flame or Reapered or
the original Shy
or Shy or Smeb or some of these other people were like really, really dominant carries. And if you look at that roster overall, that won Worlds in 2015.
Oh, I had no business winning. Come on, man.
Where are these guys today, too?
I know.
Like,
yes,
these players, they didn't last very long. And
dude, my witty but cynical withering line when they formed the lineup, when they made LCK and they said, right, you can't have sister teams anymore, and cause obviously like some players in season 4 for SKT were just bad, and then Impact went to the West. I once said, Monty, why the fuck would I want to watch SKTS with busted up Bengi and then fucking Faker? Like, this is the opposite of a team. So, yeah, that's what SKT was when they had the dynasty, for fuck's sake. It was a team, it was the sister team that wasn't even that good. I agree definitely about Marin, by the way. Because the other thing is, he really was
overrated.
It's like my joke, he was the Korean Huni, which is a straight fire joke, but in style of players, well, like, dude, he was so irresponsible. Like, here's the thing. Everyone was like, he's a genius shot caller. Right, calling the jungler to top lane isn't shot calling. Otherwise, every top laner in fucking history who plays carries is a shot caller. Like, this guy was one. The reason he was like Hooney is he either smashed the lane because he did this, or he just kept going and fucking fed the lane. I was depressed. No, that was the ultimate team, I think, where Faker was working with the least like relative talent. It was getting everything out of him. The
fact that Faker won a world championship with that roster is ridiculous. Like, it would have been the equivalent of Uzi winning the world championship in season 4.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Good analogy. Yeah. And there was also that famous stat as well, right? Where at the tournament, the signature champ Faker used to win the tournament was Rise, right?
Yep.
Go look it up now. Rise was played in that tournament something like 7 or 8 times. It was won on 5 times, all by Faker the 5 times. He went 5-0. So essentially, he took a champion the rest of the world, including for the whole tournament, decided is not a meta champion, and he dominated with it. Because you can imagine what you can do with Rise if you're Faker. And one thing Faker always had was mad map understanding as well. So think of what you can do with the Rise ultimate. Like, this guy was fucking... Again, this is the reason why Faker... Like, as much as I do think individually as a mid laner, you could put Rookie against Faker historically, just like eye test, level of player. The difference is this. Faker was everything. He was your captain, your shot caller, the person that you play around, the guy who can also play lane perfectly in farm, but also solo kill you and roam and be the pressure vacuum. But then if he gets to jungle, like the guy, he really was. I know, it's like I once said back in the day, it was another one of my good lines. It's like you actually, when he was at his peak, you couldn't overestimate how good Faker was. That's how like insane he was.
And there's been no other player in league history that's been even close to that level of dominance either, which is what's so kind of shocking about it. And it is unlikely to be repeated probably ever in history.
I'll give you a couple more then. So obviously a classic one.
Here's the other thing. Maybe that is the argument, because they only lost 1 game at that entire world championship, and it was with the worst teammates Faker ever had. Across the board.
That was arguably the best world win, yeah, for sure. And that also, I'll throw some out there. Like, I think early season 3 Wei Zhao Basically, if you don't know, everyone in the world learned to play an AD carry from this guy. Because whenever, by the way, his rival originally was Doublelift, and as everyone knows, it's not a meme. He wasn't even using his brain; he was being piloted by Chauster. So really, Chauster was the best AD carry. He just had it was like fucking Warcraft 3. Yeah. He just had like a champion that he used on the game, you know, while he was playing. So Wei Zhao, if people don't know. Put it this way, I know everyone now is going to go, I can do that in bronze. Actually, some of the Wei Zhao clips on YouTube even hold up. Like, he is just kiting perfectly. He is, like, flawless in lane. He can be self-sufficient as a fucking AD carry. And then in the team fights, he just smurfs on everyone. Like, basically, whatever you think of Peak Uzi later, Wei Zhao was that before then. So, like, I always think he's another example of, unfortunately, his team had the insane streak after a Worlds and then during a Spring. So that doesn't help you, buddy. You don't get to win Worlds if you do that. So I think I'd put his, like, for ADC, another Peak that's fucking bonkers. I think if we're going with some modern day examples, I've got to bring out the Shy. I'm going to say off the top of my head, I think it was like, I think maybe spring season 9. I'm remembering the season where, because obviously they went to MSI as the champions. I'm remembering the one where he was playing games in LPL where he was playing like fucking Vladimir into bad matchups where you're supposed to scale, and he was just killing people at the beginning of the fucking lady phase and doing stuff like when they dive him, the dive fails because he dodges, and then he chases each of them out and then solo kills them all. Like this guy at that time, like that's like a level where again, like nobody can play that. You just can't play like that in top lane. I don't think any human can. Like for me, he was like just above and beyond.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely one of the all-time great players. Also, Flame in like 2013,
season 3 spring. Yeah,
was just on another level compared to every other top laner.
Hence the Flame Horizon.
Yep,
that's the thing people forget, Monty. You know when people still use that to this day? Wow, he's about to Flame Horizon. We'll do it again, just like we do every fucking year with the Dade Award. We will explain to you, the pleb in the industry, like the motherfuckers from LEC who stole Euphoria from Veteran, what our own terms are about that you now misuse. So here's what the Flame Horizon is. In lane, you are up 100 CS. Not at the end of the fucking game when you might have been under a fucking inhib farming the ZD carry. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So he was in lane, Flame Horizon motherfuckers, because they were playing a super scaling farm up style where you would play the 6-man style that Monty wrote the art club out. And then here's the other detail you got to throw in. He was Flame Horizon the other Korean top laners, the best top laners in the world. Shy, Magnum, keep going. When you guys say it in LCS, you're saying like, oh my God, guys, I can't believe that fucking Licorice is Flame Horizon Viper who isn't on Riven. It's like, crazy freak. I don't know what's going on, mate. Like, anyway, you've triggered me there. So
I didn't trigger you.
Inadvertently.
I mentioned Flame and you got triggered.
That's all it took.
All right. Let's move on to the next question, because that was a good question, though. I like that question. Yeah. Additionally to esports, you both periodically discuss other forms of sport and competition around the world, like F1 Super League, NFL, NBA. What are some factors or metrics you consider when judging the effectiveness of a competitive league and its broadcast production? Are there any notable standouts in recent years? I mean, I look at, I started as a sports fan before I was ever an esports fan. Grew up watching football, American football, so I've always been a fan. I think the NFL is still the gold standard of sports production today. Just in terms of the technology and how they capture the on-game action is incredible. It is absolutely fucking amazing.
Probably the best.
It's insanely good. Like the viewership experience is second to none.
Like, when people even take it for granted, Monty. Think about the epic. Like, everyone remembers those famous catches, like the Tyree helmet catch in the Super Bowl, the fucking the Julian Edelman one who just retired, where it was against I think it was the Falcons, right? Or was it the Seahawks? That one, the one where he did the catch just from the ground. What people forget is this: they take for granted. Why do we have a perfect camera angle?
Exactly.
Like, remember that if that was the wrong angle and you were blocked off in like an 80s game in basketball, like, good luck. You just wouldn't see it. You just have to look at a pixel. You can see these in like 4K. Zoomed right into the perfect. They're unreal in the NFL, aren't they?
I mean, the cameras that they have above the field as well. I mean, even the technology where they have like the first down marker superimposed. Well, it doesn't like go over the top of the players, dude. For you guys who don't know, the way they do that is actually fucking insane. So the way that the technology works is they take a laser imager into the stadium while it's empty, right? And they create a 3D model of the interior of the stadium. And then every camera is basically attached to that, like functionally kind of like attached to the 3D model, so that the camera's position is relative to the 3D model that they made of that stadium, so that as they switch cameras and change angles, the line on remains in the same place, because it's the 3D image of the stadium is rotating with the camera, which is fucking bonkers that they do that. But it is really impressive. I think that what I like about F1 is the shoulder content. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Drive to Survive series, which I know F1 fans are like, they make up the storylines and blah, 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 blah.
Of course, guys, they do. The fucking drive cars. What do you expect?
If you
it's
look
not anime, is it?
If you look at the fucking way they edit the show together, and the interviews that they get with the players or the drivers, and the amazing sound bites, and the way that they can tell their own stories, and then it's basically perfectly edited. It's perfectly edited to drive the narratives and to show you really fucking cool racing shots at the same time. They do an insane. That show is one of the best things that's ever been made from a sports documentary perspective, and they keep doing it over and over and over again and just nail it every single fucking time. So I like it. I like it.
I actually think, by the way, because he obviously put in the element about production here and like how it's set up and what's relevant. I actually think there are a lot of legacy sports that don't hold up at all with the technology. Like, if people don't know, one thing that particularly soccer, European Association football or whatever, and fucking NBA have, is because it's just too entrenched in tradition. Everyone wants to watch the game from the boomer POV in the back of the stadium that their fucking granddad watched it from. Now, I'll tell you, if you ever see clips where they show you, like, for example, the obvious one for soccer would be head on. You want to see the guy running up and he kicks it straight in the corner. You don't want to go, well, based on the fact I watched a lot of games, I think that's going in the corner. You don't want that. Like, you want the human eye to be able to see. So whenever they do like experimental camera angles, because they did it from the NBA once where they did like a court side one, Monty. I tell you what, it made the dunks look incredible, mate. Because then when the guy just like you see how high he jumps up, and the people from the view up there, it doesn't look as sick. So unfortunately, though, whenever they experimented with these, I know there was always like mad pushback from the fucking boomers, like, it's not the camera angle I used to. This is not my sport. So I think actually a lot of sports. It's funny. This is where esports could be way ahead with like the observers we have in Counter-Strike and stuff. I actually think we've actually had to tackle a lot of the problems that they just take for granted because the sports are huge.
Yeah, one of the things that I find really interesting about the NFL this last season is that they started doing what we do in esports and what we did last time with Flashpoint, which is using illustrations of the players. So they've started to actually steal from esports productions.
Oh, and they were
when they had more like
as well.
Those were cool really good likenesses. Yeah, they were cool. They were really fun, and they started to use these, like, especially when a player would score a touchdown, they would show like a comic book style version of that character. And that last season was the first time they had ever done that in the NFL. But that is definitely taken like straight. That's taking a note straight out of esports. Like, we've been doing that for decades at like OGN and stuff like that. So I think that you really start to see how the NFL and other leagues are starting to learn from what we were doing, which I think was cooler and much more advanced in terms of esports production. So it's fun. I mean, I always watch these things with an eye for the production and trying to learn, the best practices, because the producers at the NFL in particular are just exceptional.
I'll chuck really one more out there, because to me, one of the most, it's actually not even as hyped as it should be. It should be a way bigger story and people should know it, but they don't, sadly. So I'm sure everyone at some point in the last 20 years has watched a poker show, right? And they're all really fun. Even if you don't know that much about poker, it's exciting. They do it's always no limit hold'em. So there's always like, all ins and people doing big bluffs. What you don't realize is, again, this is why when someone invents something and it's brilliant, actually it will tend to go under the radar because you think, well, that's obvious you'd do that. Whoever invented, I forget the guy's name, the fucking hole cards cam where you can see under the table what cards they have, was a genius, because before that they literally used to just sit there and they would have like a sick pro who'd try and guess what they had and go, well, I think he might have king jacket. Like, it's totally different if you know the literal cards. And so the way they not only showed that, which was a genius fucking innovation, whoever thought that up, but then the way they would sort of like, they would they knew the pacing of the hand, like when to put all the emphasis on it, when to just go through it quickly. Like, I know those shows, again, because like the World Series or whatever was mainly more about like storylines and see like some like rando if he's going to win or whatever. Like, they definitely played into the reality TV side of it, but like the actual innovations broadcast wise were fucking, that's just like $1 million ideas right there. Whoever came up with that, what a fucking genius.
All right, let's go on to the next one. So both of you have referenced you are big fans of Dune. And in fact, I think this is your favorite book, right, Thorin? What do you think about the trailer for the newest adaptation? Do you think Dune is impossible to adapt into a movie. So I really like the casting of the new Dune. Like, I think it looks good. My initial opinion of seeing the casting and seeing the trailer was it makes me excited and doesn't seem bad, but obviously we'll wait. I think that it's possible to adapt the first Dune. I think by the time you get to the fourth Dune book, I question whether it is possible to adapt it into a movie. So I guess the problem is like, even if this one's good, I'm not sure it will stay good because I don't know if it's possible to adapt some of the later books into movies.
I'm actually, from the trailer, I wasn't that hyped, actually. I thought it was like, it looked decent. And the main reason I'll give the movie a try is because, first of all, yeah, it's like one of my favorite series. But more importantly, the director is someone who's done a lot of good work.
Yeah,
so I'll give him a try.
I like Arrival a lot.
I give people like that a lot of leeway, you know. The problem I have is, to me, I can't believe that the TV studios haven't figured this out. Did you like Game of Thrones? Spoiler, everyone did, even though it actually went off a cliff 3 seasons before the end. But all keep lying yourself, it was just season 8. Everyone likes Game of Thrones. Just take the fucking Dune series, the first 6 books, and do a Game of Thrones series. Not only, by the way, will it be amazing because it's all about political intrigue, but still magical elements and then human elements and then stories evolving. But even better, just like Game of Thrones. And if you're American TV, you should be listening to me right now. American TV structure goes like this. You do season 1, and then you have to wait for what the numbers are and whether you get the commission for season 2. And if it goes badly, you have to end after season 1. But if it goes great, like Game of Thrones, even if there's no books, you keep going, right? Well, the best thing is, because there's 6 books and they're super deep with intrigue, if you get a season 1 and season 2 that are really good in Dune, you can run that motherfucker for like 10 seasons if you want. You could really go ham. And so I think, to me, it's just a mad missed opportunity. It should just be made as like a mini series, in my opinion. It'd be the obvious angle. Especially
because there's so much money in television now that it is really surprising that they wouldn't make that decision, because I think it would be much more compelling. I mean, my concern is that there's too much in the first book to get into a movie. Right.
There's too much nuance you're going to cut in the series. Like, think about the way Dune works. One of the things about Dune is, in the first book, you get one person's perspective on a universe and things happening, right? And then in the other books, you go to a different person's perspective. But in doing so, the guy eventually explores all the major like types of civilization and types of people. But that takes a long time, and you have to basically lay the groundwork. That's why I give the example of Game of Thrones, because the reason the Game of Thrones books are worth reading if you've only watched the show, is because there's like, you probably got like 30% of the story from the fucking TV show. There's so many characters they cut because they don't want to bring that guy in later, etc. So in Dune, the problem is you have to build up early on a lot of things that you would be the obvious things to cut for a Dune movie. Like, you're not going to bring up the fucking Teleaxu and all these like other civilizations that only become super relevant in later books, you know. So to me, it's like, that's why you need to have like the time to really pace it. Because the thing about Game of Thrones that always worked for me, and why season 8 was so egregious, is they never sped through it until season 8. They always kind of took their time and actually paced it like reasonably. So you got to see all the storylines build up and then this character come in and do that. It's why Game of Thrones for me was always the ultimate TV show. It was the only one I used to ever watch previously on Game of Thrones, because then you'd know, like, all right, the reference is something from, ages ago.
Sure,
now I should be, because normally you skip those. You're like, well, I watched the last one.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I don't know. I agree with you. I'm hopeful, but we'll see. I will say that the Mortal Kombat movie that I watched it last night, and it was surprisingly fun. So I did enjoy that one. So maybe WB and HBO can put on a good Dune movie. But that's the other thing, Thorin, when you mention this, is that Dune is literally produced by Warner Brothers that owns HBO. So if anything, they should be the ones to understand that.
And I'd even say, by the way, bearing in mind, like, it seems like this. I've never seen it like raved about, but I noticed that like The Expanse has sort of like a cult following of its own. If a show like that has a cult following, those books aren't even famous. Get fucking Dune into a series. What are we doing? Why are we dicking around?
It's all right. We'll get Dune into a series maybe someday. But I think there's a lot of missed opportunities in sci-fi. Like, I'd love to see a Hyperion series also, but who knows when we're going to get that. At what point does NA wind up getting to the point where teams truly have no talent that are actually originally from NA? Well, it's happening. 100 Thieves is already there. It just depends on how long it takes. It depends on how long it takes teams to get everybody residencies from other places, I guess, would be the answer to that question.
The thing is, think about it logically, right? So Hooney now is a resident. So TSM, in theory, in the future, like, they're fucked. Power of Evil is probably miles away. So they're not that close to it. Cloud9, if they don't want Fudge, next year, I think Sven is a resident. So they could, in theory, just add an elite top laner. He could even be a Korean. And obviously, Team Liquid basically did sort of already do this, except they kept tactical and they didn't choose, but that could be a different player in the future as well. So, like, to me, you look at because I know Jensen's a resident as well. So, to me, like, I actually think it's inevitable eventually it happens. In fact, I've got a video coming out on this soon where basically it's one of the ways I actually sort of make fun of TSM, because to me, the idea that of all the grandfathered players into that motherfucking residency, you had Bjergsen from day one and didn't just permanently stack Impact. Something like all the players you'd want with him, like Reginald's an idiot. Like, he did put some other good lineups that didn't work. I'll give him credit for those. He tried to make Western super teams, basically. But the idea that this guy, for that many years, was like, I don't want Koreans. It's like, well, you know what, Reginald? In many ways, this is season 2 just playing out all over again, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, the lineup that they could have had with residency now would have been pretty ridiculous.
It would be bonkers, yeah. Think about it, dude. They could have Doublelift, Bjergsen, like if you even wanted to keep Doublelift. But let's say you have Bjergsen. Let's say you had an Impactor or someday. Right? Remember, these are all residents. Like, dude, at this point in time, I could have like Yankos and Mickey X as my fucking support jungle duo if I want to pay them 10 times more. But like there's worlds in which you could make some seriously sick lineups.
All right. Based on your content in the last year or two, that the head coach position in League of Legends is rapidly becoming occupied primarily by those with exceptional knowledge of the game or master's experience rather than man managers or leaders of men. Given that I've coached before and Thorin has indicated there is a reality where he would consider filling that role later in his career for the right amount of Skrilla, do either of you think your skill sets as veterans of the industry and esports philosophers is still compatible with being a head coach? I mean, yes, because here's the thing, is that it's very useful to have positional coaches who have deep knowledge or game ability, but there is a kind of sanity check based off of extensive experience of what kind of long-term prospects players have, as well as frankly just an allocation of resources. Like, how do you schedule practice, practice methodology? How do you spend your time? What do you do with interpersonal relationships between coaches and players? There's tons of this stuff that I think is very hard when you're younger, that you gain skill in as you are exposed to more professional situations and more types of personalities as you get older. So yes, I do think there is.
Yeah, basically the whole reason why this question always is puzzling to other people is because at the moment the people who are in the scene always set it up wrong. They set it up as like LS style, like, right, well, the reason why the coach should be like a plat or diamond level player or an ex-pro is because he's going to coach. It's because he's looking at the current way you coach the game. And so what's the other side of the dichotomy? It's just a shit guy trying to do that. A guy who never was a pro, trying to be a pro expert. That I agree with. Of the two, I'd obviously pick the pro or the guy who's at that level.
Yes.
But here's the problem. As you say in the question, the different type of manager is the man manager. The guy who, for example, the obvious team would be G2. I'm not joking. I could coach G2. I'd have to have a sick strategic coach for the bands, of course. But these players are so fucking good individually that guess what? I wouldn't be spending all my time looking at how are they macroing in the mid game. I'd be spending my time like working out like what are Reckless's issues and why doesn't he want to carry in these cases? Or, for example, why does Wonder choose not to play at certain times? Is the way I could convince him to play like a certain time and then he gets extra time off it. It's how you balance and work with the personalities, the egos, the relationships. And so the reason why I do think there are certain people, not many, but who could do that is because, like, in my case, just for personal interest outside of this world of potentially coaching, I've essentially studied the greatest coaches in sports history and the greatest star players in sports history, and I've known a lot of players for many, 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 many years. Like, one of the things I've never understood, Monty, is when morons always assume, it's always the Redditor level person, they assume that cause me and you both aren't pros and they're watching the stream as well, they're on equal ground to us. When people come on these shows and I can relate to people who don't even remember their own lives, stories that happened to them. Yeah. We've been talking to the most influential pros for fucking 10 years. You haven't. So do you imagine we might have any insight you don't? Like, the whole reason why it's so glorious, the mad comeuppance all the Reckless fans have had, it's because I've known these stories from the beginning. Every player who didn't like Reckless, who was his teammate, who do you think they come to? They come to the fucking Magic Man and they bring me the stories and we sit down and then I gather them all. And then I remove the names and I find a way to make it a banter. But it's secretly got truth behind it. There you go.
Yeah. And also it's the way you allocate resources. So if you have somebody who, let's say I have a strategic coach who's very good at training my top laner. Well, you have to make a decision about, do we work on existing champions? Do we need to expand the pool? Do we work on orthodox stuff, unorthodox stuff? And that's synthesizing information that you receive from all of your players and an ability to interpret the play style of the team and what would be most effective. And a Masters player doesn't necessarily doesn't have that information synthesis skill in a more macro or holistic perspective.
Oh, and by the way, I'll just throw this in there. Sorry, did you finish your point?
No, that's it. I mean, it's just it's a different skill set. That's all.
Yes. The one thing I will throw in there is one area that it does suck, though, is like, listen, a lot of the actual like mental stuff that I would like to do and training methods I have never been done by League of Legends coach. I can tell you most of them, even when I've floated the ideas, like they don't get what I'm talking about. But sadly, one thing that would actually now not mean anything is I also was into the idea of coaching before the West overtook the Koreans, because what I always knew, and this is one thing just from understanding meta game concepts in multiple games, is whenever there is a dominant meta, there will always inferred and implied be a counter meta that goes essentially encounters the dominant meta, but it itself won't be the best way to play if you're the best team. But what it means is, if you can't be the best team, you should actually go the counter meta approach, right? And so, to me, this is why I always reference those Flash Wolves teams. They weren't playing the way the Koreans did. Like fucking Sword Art, even back then, he wasn't playing half the champions that were like the normal ones. Like he was playing all the like weird ones and the hook champs or an engaged one, and he playing his own way. And he would let fucking the NL guy farm under a tower while he roamed before roaming was a thing. And then they would play whatever they wanted mid jungle, and they would play a weird tank top. Like what they did was they just said, "Fuck trying to be a shit version of Koreans. Let's just do what we can do in our own way." And only we can do. And guess what? That will give you a chance against Koreans, as this conversation about Moscow 5 hopefully open people's eyes. So I personally, long ago, would have been going heavy on that. That's why if you look at the players I wanted to coach, it was people like Swaz, people who have a unique charm that maybe could go against the great Korean players, you know.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Which Worlds result do you think would have changed the most by the introduction of a double elimination playoff bracket? Probably season 2 that we discussed today. I think for the most part, there's kind of two things that have happened in League of Legends. Either the team that should have won Worlds did win Worlds, or the team that there was an upset, but it was in like the finals. So a double elimination bracket wouldn't have changed anything.
I'll tell you my obvious one, Season 8. IG wasn't the best team going into the tournament.
That's
KT
true.
was in position to look good.
Yeah,
RNG,
KT.
if they play anyone else, who knows what happens. I don't think G2 beats anyone else. Fnatic looked dodgy against ED. Mate, go across the line. C9 only won because it was that weird freak attack. I'd love to replay that. I'd love to see the lower bracket of that fucking tournament. It would be amazing, by the way. It's so wide open.
Yeah, I think even if you look at the one with the Rocks, Tigers, or Kuta, whatever they were called at the time, SKT semifinal, I still think SKT probably, I think SKT probably still wins that Worlds.
They're probably playing the final against Rocks again, but so it would be cool.
Yeah, that would be cool. It would be cool, but I'm not sure the result would have changed. Whereas, like, I think season 2, there is a very, like, I think all those teams in the semis were so close that there's a very real chance that it would have been, like we discussed today, a CLG EU Moscow 5, scenario potentially. They would have met in the lower bracket, but I think like one of those teams could have won. Frost could have won too. But I think, the KT one is pretty egregious as well, I have to say. So it's probably that one or season 2.
And also, this is just purely for storylines, not really necessarily to be that key. I just hate that last Worlds you had all the bloody Chinese teams on one side and all the Koreans on the other. Like, that just fucking sucked. Like, I wanted those teams to play each other, so I'd love to see them in the lower bracket. Like, who would like to see top esports play against, I don't know, fucking like G2 or something? Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Sounds
that was rough that we got all the LPL rematches in one side of the bracket. It's a joke question. Would you rather see esports org hiring competent people and making good decisions, or see Red Eye finally do the album? I'd rather take the thing that affects my life more, which is esports orgs hiring competent people.
I'd go the other way, because that's like that fucking meme format, isn't it? Like, oh, what do you want for Christmas, your birthday? A unicorn. All right, what else? Well, what about Riot just hires competent people? Like, what color unicorn? Like, Listen, just for the banter, because basically the joke from By the Numbers is we want Red Eye because he has such like a gruff but iconic voice. We want him to do a Christmas album where he sings all the classic tunes, you know, like because he has that ridiculous voice, and but it's so iconic. So that was the joke that me and Richard had. We want him to last Christmas, I gave you my heart. We just want that because it'd be amazing. And we tried, by the way, because what cunts we are. We genuinely tried to gaslight him into saying it would be like a good charity initiative and that he had a good voice. Sadly, I don't think I think he only half believed it. I think he knew better, you know. He's a wily guy. He knows what he's doing.
It'll come out at the same time as DDK's rap album. All right. Since all the teams and pro players will be staying in Iceland over MSI, what impact do you think the ping will have on the players, if any, to solo queue? None.
Say that again. What is it?
All the pro players will be staying in Iceland over MSI. What impact do you think the ping, 40 to 50 milliseconds to EU West, will have on the players? I don't think it'll have an effect.
I mean, listen, for NA players, it can be better. The problem, I think, is obviously Koreans and Chinese people are going to be like, what the fuck? The Koreans especially.
It's only to solo queue, though. They'll have the servers for the event in Iceland.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, even then, like for solo queue, like I remember there was some quote years back where Faker said that he thought like 30 ping was almost unplayable or something. And then people in NA just like, really, homie, it's my life. It's my, you know, like, so Koreans definitely would complain.
From what you've seen from playoffs, who is your dark horse for MSI? I don't think there is a dark horse. I'll be real. Like I think maybe Mad Lions you would say is a dark horse, but especially with the Vietnamese teams out. And
if they mean dark horse, like they have a chance to win, there isn't one. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, exactly.
There isn't one.
I think this is actually one of the more boring, unfortunately, tournaments. I mean, hopefully I'm wrong, but this one seems pretty clear cut as an LPL or LCK winner, and very little wiggle room. Like anything besides the question is really like do LPL or LCK make number one, and then do LCS or LEC make 3 or 4? There's very little wiggle room, I think.
Like, I think this is one of the worst years in many years for the idea that LCS or LEC could win.
Yeah, I agree.
Just is, unfortunately.
So I like analogies between esports games. Saying to a CSGO fan that the Shy uses top lane like Simple uses the op can be a quick and easy way to show how this one player can break the role/gun in a unique, mechanically impressive way. What are your guys' favorite or interesting esports analogies? I have to think. We've made so many over the years.
I'll make one up on the spot because it's actually tied. I'll make it tied into the episode because I can just do it like that. So even though I don't know much about fighting games, thanks to reading actually the work of a friend of mine, Stuchu, who did some brilliant work in multiple different games, including fighting games, he basically told me a bunch of really interesting details about the legendary fighter Daigo from Street Fighter, right? And so I'm going to tie this to Moscow 5. Just as that earlier example of how not only would they pick whatever they wanted, but even if you were like Froggen on Anivia or fucking Stanley on Nidalee, they wouldn't ban it, even though they knew it was really strong, because their logic was, well, we want to beat you on it, because that's gangster as fuck. Now, here's the thing. Most star players and great players in history just want to win. They just want to win. They don't care how it happens. They just want to win. So basically what they do is they try to just find your weakness and beat you at your weakness. So if you can draft them out of the game, you do it. If you can play a style that doesn't make them able to play, you do it. Now, what's sick about this Daigo guy, based on what I was told, is that he basically believes in some sort of fucking like Bushido samurai code that you shouldn't do that, because if you're truly the greatest, you should beat the guy at his strength. Now that is fucking so sick. You almost can't believe these people exist outside of an anime. Like that sounds like some anime character, but it's fucking amazing if you can do it. And obviously this guy did do it, you know, so fair play.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Gangsters fucking it.
All right, we'll get through some of these quickly. What player would you want to help ghost write a biography for? Ooh.
I mean, the obvious one would be Reginald. Listen, I have to have a lot of. All I'm saying is, I have to have a lot of creative license, Reginald. It ain't going to just be your life story, mate. It's going to be my version of your life story. Other one wouldn't be popular. Reckless, nice Reckless biography.
I would want Reapered, just because I think that would be a really interesting one.
Oh, but yes, some amazing. Yeah, basically, if people don't know, Reapered actually has like some super good stories, but they're all like shit you can't say on stream. So if he wanted to do like a real tell-all biography, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
It'd be really good. Coma would be another interesting one, even though he's a coach. That would be a really great one. Of course, Ass Pounder 420, your favorite fan. Why won't Ocelot make eye contact with me anymore while we're making love? Well, I think that's more difficult if you're behind him. So try something else. Let's move.
Well, actually, the irony is he got fucked by a rogue, and rogues do it from behind him. Straight, seamless.
Very good. Very good.
That's an old school reference as well.
Are there any matchups in any year that you would enjoy if they had 100 best of fives? There's a bunch
Wait a minute. 100 best of 5. I don't listen, aside from season 2 Worlds, which was sort of like 100 best of 3s, but I feel like almost any matchup 100 best of 5s might get on, might tall.
I think so.
Basically, he's asking what the best matchup ever is to replay, right?
Yeah. I would love to see more of that 2016 era SKT versus Rocks Tigers. I think that was an incredibly interesting and fun rivalry that year.
I think stylistically, even it's a great one because again, they're so different. Like, for example, SKT was still in the era where they have players that maybe aren't as good. I know everyone believes Wolf and Bang are amazing, but players who probably aren't like world championship level, but Faker's making a win. So basically, to me, SKT was like, it's like you basically have to make the most of very little, and you have very like strict lines that you're painting within. Rocks Tigers was so creative though, and they had so many different incredible things they would do and flout the convention. So I even thought the matchup was brilliant. So you can imagine in a million best of 5s, you wouldn't just play the same best of 5 over and over again. It'd be constantly changing and evaluating. I'd love to see actually who comes out on top in that one.
That would be really fun. I think 2014 Samsung White versus Samsung Blue, because they were such different teams, yet they had intimate knowledge of each other. They always created super interesting series. That was really fun. Honestly, like 2012 or 2013 TSM versus CLG, even though they were both shit, was really fun to watch.
Oh, it was very hype, yeah, for sure. The shit talking was wild.
2015. What else could I say here? Like 2016 Renegades versus Dignitas. It was complete garbage, but honestly, watching how bad those games would have been had they played a bunch more would have been pretty funny on the comedy end of things. I think those are pretty good. You have any that you would really like to watch?
Just based on how they went that year, I thought the season 9 games between G2 and SKT were fascinating. Because like every time it was like, what are they going to do to win this series? And how do you, because I know this is what's sad about history, Monty. It's one of the reasons actually I do what I do is because I know that everyone, when they get the result, retcons all the fucking tournament. And the second that you win the tournament, you're always going to win the tournament. And you're always the best. In fact, you're always the favorite in that match. So what I always want to do is bring the context. And each time they met SKT, there was a world in which they weren't winning. Like when they met at MSI, they just had that dodgy ass fucking group stage. And yeah, they'd beaten SKT in it. But you know what? SKT, everyone was saying Clid was going to be the MVP of the fucking tournament. Like everyone thought they could win. Then you go to the Worlds one. That's the one where they've already basically lost 1 million scrims to Koreans and themselves are like, we're probably not going to win the tournament. But somehow, again, this is why they like Moscow 5. In the server, they just do the fucking like mind wipe and then they're just playing godlike shit. But they were doing that thing where they were like, oh, we'll just give up every fucking Baron or whatever. Like, again, those series were just fascinating because they were just like the most extreme stylistic clash you could ever have. It was the pure Korean style, because this was when I think they had Zephyr was still drafted, I think, by the end. They had the pure Korean style versus the ridiculous, like, peak Western, pure creative style. So I don't think you ever get a matchup like that ever again in history, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's fair. That's definitely a fair assessment. Next. League, curious about the thoughts on the following statement. League is a better game to watch than to ever play yourself. Follow-up. Do you think Riot should be concerned at all about players who no longer play the game but watch the esports content in regards to getting them to play the game again? Or are they content with riding the huge player base in China? I mean, I don't know what Riot's motivations are, so I can't talk about that. I mean, I think that basically any esport for me is better to watch than to play yourself because I'm simply not as skilled and I like to see super skilled people play the game, and my fundamental enjoyment comes from breaking that down in my own mind and then relaying that to other people or having discussions on it, which I find fun. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask.
The problem for me is that one of the reasons why in League it's pretty extreme is because, first of all, to this day, unless people opt in, it does not have voice communication. So as a result, not only are you playing individually, but you're straight up playing individually when you play solo queue. So the worst thing about League, contrasted with the pro game, is solo queue is nothing like pro League of Legends. Like so you can't really even ever feel like you are playing the game that the pros play. Whereas like CSGO, listen, they're not going to work together and people are going to fuck around, but like people vaguely have the same fundamental principles of what they're going to do in a game, you know, like you can still have fun doing it. And then I've always said, League's the game where you have to have like a stack of 5 people that you know that you can trust, because the problem is everyone knows, even if you're doing well in your lane, like if you're the AD carry, you're up 2 kills and 20 CS, and then you check that scoreboard and that top lane fucking cocksucker Nasus is down 4 kills. You just feel a sinking feeling. It's like, what do I even do now? Like, it sucks. So if that's your friend, you can at least tell him a voice comes like, play safe now. Maybe just buy tank. You know, like you can actually make it fun if you have the stack. I think it's actually a fun game socially. I think it's a terrible game. It's just like solo queue experience. It's probably the worst I've ever played in esports. Like, dude, all I'll tell you is this. I'll give everyone a free little joke here, because obviously I actually advertise I'm terrible at League of Legends. This is how bad I am at League of Legends, Monty. I play in the meta where at least half the time, when I'm support, remember, at least half the time, my AD carry misses the first 3 CS because he just leashes for too long on the red buff. Every time. Even though I ping the motherfuckers, I'm like, it's the first 3 CS! You're aware the level 2 level is like one of the main fucking power. What are we doing? And I'm just malding, but I'm like, no, to be fair, I'm also troll picking half the game. So what do you want? I can't complain. That's how bad I am at League of Legends. That's a freebie for everyone.
What's your opinion on Seb in Dota 2? Are there any equivalent coaches / players? I don't know who Seb is.
He's the guy who
Dota 2 is my
weakness. The OG team that won the 2 TIs, and the first one was in very unusual circumstances where basically they actually had like star players leave their team for Evil Geniuses, and they weren't even expected to make TI, and they not only made it, they played like a totally counter meta. At the time, it was like win lane, win game, and they were playing like shit that didn't even win lane. And basically, it was kind of like a Moscow 5 scenario. They just played the champions they liked, or heroes in Dota, and essentially they had a similar mentality. They had a mentality of like, what are the fundamental concepts that will always exist, like when you can team fight, how you get back in a game, which person needs to be ahead in a lane to give you combat potential. And they basically like had the most insane mental fortitude to be able to like outplay, for example, like the PSG team was like an unbelievably good team, this Chinese team, and on paper probably should have won the tournament. So Seb is the guy where he was their coach when they had those star players, Monty, and then he had to become a player later, even though he had been a player like, 5 years earlier or something. He became a player, so I think was just like the support or whatever. And in one of the games in the final, he even like carries the game. So like the key thing about this guy, which a lot of people love, like I've done like literally a 5-hour reflections with him. The reason it's 5 hours is because he's one of those people who actually would fit the category of what I said before about what I want as a coach. He's the guy who's all on the mental side. He knows it's all about like what your frame of mind is, how you frame what's happening to you, how you think of your opponent, how you think of the win conditions in a game, how do you keep in a game you're behind and you feel like he's all about that. And so essentially people think he's like one of the goats of like motivating teammates and so basically knowing how to win the game without just being the most skilled player in the game. So he's a pretty cool, interesting guy.
So the question is there another player that seems to have an enormous impact on his teammates by having a positive attitude all the time?
Do you know anyone who would fit that bill? Let me think. Who would?
Maybe High.
Oh, he's a pretty classic one. Yeah, sure. Because the problem in League of Legends, let's be real, maybe it's a product of what I just said about the game experience in solo queue, is a lot of the players who are really good kind of arseholes. Because you kind of have to be, because you're basically in a fucking prison riot at that point in time. It's not a gentleman's finesse sport, is it? It's just shiving motherfuckers before they get you, and then fucking betraying the guy next to you before he gets you. That's what League of Legends is. So unfortunately, a lot of the players didn't have the most fucking chipper attitude. Like a classic one is, even though in the game Soaz will never give up and will always fight. He's one of the biggest whiners of all time. Like, mate, if anything, you have to like be able to handle his personality to play with him.
Well, maybe Perks as well would fall into this camp based on what you've said, because I think Perks does have a more holistic view of the game from my conversations with him, and also the effect.
He definitely has like the aura, when it's like, that's why I always give that example. You look down the line and you see him, and you go, "Fuck it, we're okay. We'll probably win this game." You just do, because he's like he is like the protagonist of European League of Legends, and he's ridiculous his career. Actually, I've heard Caps is a little bit like that. Like I've heard Caps basically as someone where he always has like a funny joke to say, or even if he like ints the game, he'll just be laughing. Like there's that classic story actually from the SKT MSI Season 9 series. There's the game, I think it's Game 3 or Game 4, where like they fucking give up some pick to like Faker, and Caps is like, it's okay, we can play against it. And they were like, okay, so what do you want then? And he's like, yeah, I don't know actually. And then he has to like pick like a 0 or something he doesn't even like the idea that you would even do that. But if you didn't have like a light-hearted tone to that, everyone's heart sinks and the whole series is over, isn't it? Like this guy managed to keep the team spirit. So I've heard he's actually a guy that's like really fun to play with as well.
Makes sense. All right, last question. When do we get pay-per-view back in esports? This is
the $1 million question, literally.
Yeah, I know people don't like pay-per-view, but in terms of actually supporting the industry, it is enormously important that people start to return to this model. And people think pay-per-view, and some of them think, oh, it's like $50 or whatever a UFC fight costs. Literally in 2009, I was paying what, $20, 2010, I was paying $20 a month to GSL, and they were offering me 20 hours of content a week. And I never thought anything of it because I was watching so much. Like, in terms of entertainment, the amount I was paying per hour was like
absurd.
You
get all the games.
You get all the games. I was watching all the games. I was loving it. So I never really had a problem. People complained about subscribing to OGN, but it was like a $5 Twitch subscription. And it got, we were doing 5 days a week of broadcasts, and you could watch it for free, but you got the VODs and HD for $5 a month. And I think that's incredibly reasonable. $5 a month, by the way, guys, in terms of the monetization of this industry, even if you had a third of the viewers, we would be making probably twice as much money. And that's not a joke. It would
be insane.
There's
so many people would come into the space as well. A lot of people who are those billionaires who looked into esports like everyone like 5 years ago, but were like, monetization is just sponsorship. No thanks. Those people would immediately come in. They would get their team in the LCS, their team, like seeing CSGO team. I guarantee that would be like the game changer for the industry.
And also it would probably provide more budget to do even more cool things to provide you value.
By the way, Monty, selfishly, there's the other reason I want to have that, right? Because at the moment, the approach is just get a bunch of people who just happen to be on Twitch who use Discovery and click it on the front page, right? I want to live in a world where it's like the UFC, Monty. There are pay-per-view draws. Because you know what? There's people who are better than me at certain things, but I'm fucking box office. I'll tell you right now, I'll have spikes for some of my numbers. When I'm smashing shit off desks and stuff, I'll be fucking killing the game, mate. I'll be like Conor McGregor. I might lose, but you want to see me fight.
Or you'd have budget to do more shoulder content at a higher production value, which would be more entertaining. I mean, I think like the WWE has an amazing web platform where they have a bunch of this content because it is pay-per-view, right? And I think that WWE is much better for the fans and also as a business. So it's not just about money. It is literally offering you a better product because it is pay-per-view. And so my opinion, unfortunately, what happened, guys, is that the developers got involved and they said, this is a marketing exercise, so it's all going to be free. Whereas before the developers were involved, people like OGN, people like GomTV were charging for that experience. MLG also, because it was IPL, it was a business that was meant to be sustainable. And so the problem now is that the developers themselves, here's the box that people have backed themselves in. So you're a developer. You're coming along, oh, it's a marketing exercise. Everything is free. Oh, that's great. Now we're selling all these skins because we're showing it off on our streams. Everything's great. Well, what happens when franchises come along? What teams? Why don't you give us some money for these franchises? We're business partners now. What's that? We're not going to give you any of the skin money that we're selling from our marketing exercises. Oh, that's too bad. Guess what? It's still going to be for free because we are unwilling to put in a pay-per-view model that will actually make you money. So now you're just caught in this relationship where the teams are demanding that you need to make more money because it's an actual business that isn't a marketing exercise for a game anymore. But, the developer still wants it to be a marketing exercise. So they're not going to give you any of the revenue that is created from the act of it being a marketing exercise. So we're kind of at this log jam right now where there's two competing interests in the franchised esports market. And it's really difficult to reconcile this. And also, it's not like Twitch is giving anybody there's no media rights to sell, right? Because Twitch, YouTube, they're not giving out the big money anymore.
They have effective monopolies right now, yeah.
Yeah, they're not giving out the big money anymore. So there's no media rights. So where is the money coming from? And the answer is just sponsorships and that is shit, guys. So compare this to traditional sports. Here's how you make money in traditional sports. Oh, you sell tickets. Oh, you sell merchandise. Very little merchandise is bought from esports teams. You can't sell concessions at your arenas or your events because they're mostly in these. Well, now they're just online, but for the most part, they're in very small studios. You're not selling media rights. So it's basically just sponsors. So it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And if you guys actually care about esports, for all you people who are like, I would never spend $5 a month.
Cool, don't then. You're like, you go watch the rest of the shit. We'll pay. We'll pay for that. How about
that? But think about this. You guys will walk outside, and in a normal non-pandemic year, you don't bat an eye at spending $12, $15 on a movie ticket for 2 hours of your time.
People pay for a fucking Starbucks is egregious in this context.
Yeah, exactly.
A shit coffee that's just a garbage latte with all ice up. You pay $6 or something for that. We won't pay for a whole month of VODs. Give me a break.
You will pay for a month of like 60,
best players in the world,
60 hours of content that you watch all of it. You'll spend $60 on a new video game that you'll play for 40 hours, but you won't spend $5 on 60 hours of content that you'll watch in a given month. It's actually just fucking insane. You'll pay Riot or Blizzard $10 for a fucking skin, but you refuse. Oh, esports has to be free. It's like, fuck you. Frankly, like, that attitude is so detrimental to the industry. But I think we need to really resolve this, because the monetization, if you look at any of the financial reports, monetization per esports fan is shit. It's shit because nobody buys merch. It's shit because nobody buys products. It's shit because all of it's free. It's bad. And eventually, this is going to have to be reconciled. There is a reckoning that will come at some point in time where either people figure out how to monetize the esports audience better, which, to be fair, is a fault of the industry. I'm not trying to say the industry is a victim here. We're also super bad at monetizing users or even selling people merchandise or things that they want. That's true. But at the same time, the fact that we get $0 from media rights or very small amounts of money, and we get very small amounts, we get no money from pay-per-view, is absurd. Like, that can't be allowed to continue.
I'll give you another angle as well that'll tease people, but you'll never get it. So just suffer forever. If they actually had built up real viewer bases who paid to watch LCK, LPL, LEC, you would have, assuming Riot had half a fucking clue, way better casters and talent on these fucking desks. Like, they would literally be able to pay, like, someone like Monty, LS, like, they could just be the LPL casters, because the money that you could generate would be so much more. Whereas right now, the reason why what you see continually is someone works their way up through being a commentator or analyst and then transitions somewhere else. It's not always because they want to leave. It's because they feel like there's nowhere to go. I can't make more money. I can't do more. There's no career in that.
Or even stranger, Thorin, here's something for you. You can't get anymore. If you allow co-streaming, you can't even get the best people. Let's say if we sit in our time machine and we go back to season 3 Worlds in 2013, and you think about the fact that the desk was me, Crepo, and Doublelift the entire tournament, and people fucking loved it, and we had great synergy, and that desk is still theoretically possible now.
That would be a co-stream. Yeah. That would be a Dom co-stream or something. Yeah.
Look at Doublelift. He's got 50,000 concurrent viewers on his co-streams. Clearly, people want to watch him, but because of the business model you have made with LCS, you are unable to pay him an equivalent amount of money to be on your broadcast. That, to me, is a problem. And if you are going to lose casters to co-streaming, or you're going to lose them to their own content creation, or you're going to lose them to just general gaming streaming, look at what happened with Courage, right? He went from CDL caster to enormous YouTube streamer. Then what is you're basically just creating a system that doesn't create enough value for people who are good to stay as being a part of it. And to me, that's a big issue. It's a big issue. And then all of a sudden you're caught in a scenario where you're kind of being held hostage in some ways by your co-streamers, because what happens if Doublelift stops co-streaming? You just lose 50,000 viewers as part of your concurrence. Potentially, that's extremely dangerous for your sponsorships. So it's dicey, is what I'm saying. I think it's a dicey situation, and it is difficult to manage that. But you're just going to see more of a bleed of talent. Just keeps happening. Like Ender just left recently. Like how many casters who are at the peak of their abilities, and it's not just in League too. Look at Counter-Strike. Goodbye, Henry and
most
Moses.
of the legacy people are gone. Yeah.
It's like, what do we have to do to create enough money to keep the good people around? Because it's a catch-22 where if you lose those good people, well, then you lose viewership, and then, or you lose the desire for people to pay money. I mean, here's a fact for you. I don't know if OGN in 2013, before Riot forced OGN to stop monetizing their stream. I don't know if it was the biggest subscribed channel on Twitch, but given that I know the numbers, it had to be close. At that time period in 2013, they had tens of thousands of subscribers. And if it wasn't the biggest channel on Twitch, it definitely was close to the top at that time. And so there's a very real use case where, and remember, this was stuff that was in the middle of the night. It was a niche Korean league for a game that was certainly very popular, but was still on the rise. And it just makes me wonder where we would be at right now had the pay-per-view model continued.
Yeah,
so
there we go.
It's a bummer. It's a bummer. And you have to remember too that the OGN broadcast was just for the English stream. It was just a piggyback broadcast, wasn't even the main product. So anyway, that'll do it for this episode of SI. When does here's a question for you, because I haven't even gotten this far ahead. When does MSI start?
Isn't it on like the 6th or something? So I think it's in just over a week.
Indeed. So I guess we'll be having our MSI preview show next week, because it should be the last episode before MSI begins, and then we'll...
Oh, how about this? Listen, even though we're doing this on air, fuck it, let's just do it for fun. What do you think about, listen, let's not go ridiculous like we used to back in the day, but how about for that one, we maybe even bring in some like I'd love to get an expert who can tell me, like, would the teams from some of the lesser regions, like,
of course,
does one of them have a chance to get an upset? You know, people who can bring some extra flavor, that, because we're only going to talk about the big 4 teams realistically otherwise, aren't we? So maybe we can bring some people in who can give us some extra sort of shading, you know.
Yeah, we'll try and do one of those things where we cycle through guests every 20, 30 minutes, just so we get a lot of perspectives. One of our old kind of international competition preview shows. So we'll figure it out by next week. And we'll get going on the 3rd and see where it takes us. Okay. Well, thanks guys. Thank you for watching Summoning Insight. Go to the Discord, subscribe to the channels, etc. We'll see you back for the preview episode next week.